Hello, this is JFL, John Francis Leader, and welcome to the Body, Mind, Self podcast. So I'm here today with Patrick Cumiskey. Patrick, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
So for anybody who doesn't know you, I met you ages ago when I wanted to do some martial arts training at the time, and you came well recommended, and I certainly wasn't disappointed. It was brilliant. I loved it, and I still to this day have, retained some of the skills, I think, and though I probably need to brush up a little bit. We can talk about that another time.
We'll get you back.
But for anybody who doesn't know you or where you come from, what you do, what your interests are, who are you? What do you do?
Okay, so it's Patrick Cumiskey, and I'm the chief instructor in one of my identities is the chief instructor of Krav Maga Ireland. And basically what we do is we teach everyday normal people how to protect themselves very, very fast.
Yes.
Typically in about in a 24-hour window. So that's either 12 weeks, an hour and a half, 2 weeks, or 12 weeks, or in 2 days.
Right.
And the idea is we bring you in and we run you through a process. And when you're finished with this process, you have the ability and the skills and the mindset that can enormously affect your ability to protect yourself.
Right. One of the things I suppose I knew it to some degree before I ever trained with you, but I really appreciated when I was working with you, doing the course, is that combination of psychology and physiology, really kind of bringing it all together. And I think you're touching on that there really in the practical sense of it, just even in terms of formatting the course and that. There's a sense in which, I suppose, if we think about, let's say, academia as an example generally, there's you could spend years and years studying something, but of course then there are brief courses that sort of immediately equip you. Let's say maybe the difference in doing a first aid course over a few days versus studying biology over many years, if you know what I mean. There seemed to be something similar going on with your training, if that's a fair example.
Or to think about the idea almost as an intervention. You know what I mean? We also have a process and intervention. There are moments in your life, where you learn something, or you can go through something that can change the rest of your life. You know what I mean? And you can learn either way. You can go about the world and learn because you've been assaulted. You now learn about the world in a certain way, and you've learned something very, very quickly.
Very true.
You've got a lesson. If someone picks on you and decides to mug you or beat you up, that's a learning.
Right.
And unfortunately, if you take that happens, you learn to be afraid for the rest of your life, possibly.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And then we were the opposite. I believe that Bruce Lee has a great saying, which was, in order to learn how to swim, you've got to get wet.
Wow.
You can't, you can read all the books you want about swimming.
Yeah.
You can watch all the how-to videos about swimming. But there's a very big difference when you jump into that water and it's cold,
well
and it's
said.
deep, and you have to be able to get out of it. You know what I mean? So basically, I think we're an intervention.
Right.
It's a 12-week or 2-day. We bring you in. And I think it's experiential because I think the world is about, we talk about skills and abilities, and they emerge out of our experiences.
Right.
We're emergent.
Yes.
In the world. We don't read a book, or we don't do a thing and suddenly know something. We go and we try and we fail, and we go through all these doubts, and we go through all these highs and lows, and out of that emerges an ability. So the idea is an intervention, a process that comes through, and out of that you've gone through experiences, learned some ideas, learned some distinctions, for example, about how assault happened.
Yes. Yeah.
And gives you an insight. And when in life, anything in your world, if you get an insight, that insight can just change how you operate in the world.
Right. Very true.
Yeah.
And because there seems to be a couple of things standing out there. One is the experiential learning that you're talking about, so the learning by doing. But of course, there's a lot of, if you think about various types of martial arts or different forms of training, there's many of them that involve doing something, but still there's a sort of a practical application you seem to have focused on as well as just doing. Because a lot of people do things, but you're kind of, there's a pragmatism, I suppose, to it.
See, I'm sure you've come across all this stuff. There's a big difference in your body, in your hormones, whatever, in going into a boxing ring. You know what I mean? With the frame you have on that, and you've got your gloves, you've got the pre-rituals, pre-planning, and you go in, and it might look like you're fighting somebody, but it's a very tough, but you're actually engaged in sport.
Right.
Now, it's a very tough sport.
Yes,
in no way, saying I certainly wouldn't want to get punched by a lot of these guys.
Sure, yeah.
But it's a sport.
Yeah.
And your frame and mindset and your way, you're hormonally different.
Yes.
I don't know, have you ever, the book, I think it's Amy Cuddy, The Upside of Stress.
Okay.
So Amy Cuddy just looked at stress, and everybody goes on about how stress is so bad, and how stress brings up your affects your body and your the load on your body.
Right.
And she went and looked and did a lot of research on it, and she found that the way you label stress has a very, 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 or anxiety has a huge labeling, has a huge impact on how you actually operate. But she brought it all the way through to you're talking about physiology.
Yes, yeah.
They actually did studies, and they took studies with people, and they have a kind of a baseline stress test they put people through, which is pretty horrific, where you have to go in and talk in front of people, and they ignore you, and they put you through a terrible, and you have to hope it's your faults. You know?
Yes.
So it's a very much a good baseline stress test. But what they did was before they took 50-50 study, and before basically half of them went in to do the test, they were told stress was bad for you, stress reduces your performance, etc., etc. And then the other half, they told the people that stress was challenge, stress was alertness, and stress is all about your body dealing with tough situations. And that's all very well. So the people who saw stress as a challenge performed better. But more importantly, more interestingly, they took blood samples.
Right.
And the hormonal balance was different.
Right.
And the hormones that were different, and unfortunately I can't remember the name, the hormones that were different were the learning hormones.
Okay.
So the hormones that are associated with learning, retention, and growth were the hormones that actually were activated when people learn. So the way you think about this stuff and the way you frame it isn't just this happy clappy positive thinking. It actually affects the hormones in your body, which affects your behavior.
Very, very practically. Right. And there seems to be a huge amount of that, what you're mentioning there, that there's kind of two levels, I suppose, to feeling as we're feeling it, because there can be stress, but there can be stress about stress.
Yeah.
And again, we don't even need to use that word stress, because after all, if you're going on a holiday, there's a certain amount of stress as in organizing, isn't it? But it can be okay. This term eustress, a positive stress, isn't it? That's actually developmentally useful versus one that isn't. And either way, adrenaline in the system as well. I mean, adrenaline, if we think about it, isn't it, is an unsung hero in many cases. The amount of lives it saved, the amount of people it's helped.
And try having a good time without adrenaline.
Yeah, exactly.
But what is a roller coaster?
Yeah.
But this, the whole idea is of how the body and the brain interact, to me, is phenomenal.
Yes.
And the thing you've got to understand is that most people, we're back to sports and martial arts and all that, have never really been in a fight.
Okay.
And I'm talking about or being an assault.
Yeah.
We have one of the things we talk about is growing up. I ask people, where'd you learn to fight?
Yes. Yeah.
And we hear typically it's wrestling with the brothers and sisters. Maybe with a rugby and maybe with a boxing. Yeah. They weren't fighting.
Yeah.
They were learning how to grow. They were playing mammal games. If you look at monkeys, they have chase games.
Yeah, right.
That basically teach them how to hunt and how to chase and how to escape. Well, what we're doing, I think, is when in a lot of our rough play, is we're learning to control ourselves. We're learning to negotiate. We're learning to know that sometimes if you're a big guy, if you're rough with someone, you need to hold back.
Right.
So there's a lot of very positive learning that comes from the rough play as growing up. And one of the things that they've discovered, and again, you can find this thing, is in some Scandinavian countries, they did some really interesting studies, and they took rough play out of schools and at a very young level. And they found that when you took rough play out with young boys, kids, like really young children, their violent tendencies later on in life were higher.
Okay.
So one of the things that people confuse, what they're actually learning, you think they're learning to fight, they're not. They're learning how not to fight.
Sure.
They're learning sport, they're learning fairness, they're learning,
Yes.
And then what happens is, and that's brilliant, and that is like a fundamental of a safe society. We all learn that you can hurt somebody, you all learn you need to be safe, you need to kind of pull back. But now you walk out and you're walking down the street, and there's some guy who lives in a different world than you.
Yes.
Some guy who's basically maybe so in pain with drugs that basically they are so desperate to get a hit that you are no longer even a person to them. You are just a means to them getting out of pain.
Right.
And now these two worlds collide. You're a normal person who's never been in trouble in your life, and some predator basically who needs something you have desperately attacks you. And that is a very different than a sport. I've
heard a lot of military people make this point that somebody without that experience just can't get what it's like to be in that type of conflict, and there does seem to be a shock response, isn't it? A disbelief in the face of it. How could somebody do that? That's unreasonable. People don't act like that, but yet it's happening.
And most people don't.
Yeah.
It's the I think in The Selfish Gene, he talks about the doves and the eagles. You know?
Right.
All the doves are having a great time one day. It takes one eagle. And then, excuse me. So this idea of worlds colliding.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
True.
that's what it is. And it's interesting. You just said something very interesting. So when someone's being attacked, they always go, why? Why me?
Yes.
Just doesn't matter.
Becomes quite cognitive in the moment, doesn't it?
Why me? And the truth is, it wasn't personal.
Right.
It was, we had like, horrific story. If you remember a couple of years ago, Jill Marr, the Irish girl in Australia.
Okay, yeah.
And people go, and it's a terrible story. And there's a photograph of her, and which is before this guy, did terrible things to her, and she's talking to him.
Yeah.
And this just looks like this guy, was an animal. This guy, but there was just two people talking, and people are going, why? It doesn't matter why, when it's how. So one of the things we talk about is people. Why do people attack people? Why do people hurt people? There's loads of reasons. You know the famous story about the guys who say, "Oh, why are you an alcoholic?" And the guy says, "Because my dad was an alcoholic." And then another guy says, "Why don't you drink?" He says, "The guy said, because my dad was an alcoholic."
Yes, yeah.
You know, so it doesn't matter why.
Yeah.
It matters how. So we focus on. There's always lots of reasons. It might be just your wrong place, wrong time. It might literally just be that you have something they want. It might be a social identity thing.
Yeah.
They want to feel good about themselves by making someone else feel small or hurt. And it doesn't matter why. What we can do is there is predator behavior.
Right.
There is a behavior that people engage in when they're going to assault somebody.
Yes.
And we can teach you that.
And that, as is usually the case, that Simpsons episode, if you remember the one where there's a bully and what was it about changing? I think they could smell something. It was probably smelling adrenaline in that moment or whatever.
Yeah.
There does seem to be a sense in which, without needing to get into the intellectual aspect of it, they're just by moving differently, by standing differently, by engaging differently. I remember that was something you emphasized before. It seems to make a massive difference, and it's not on the level of negotiation. It's sort of circumventing it in a sense, isn't it? The approach you take.
Well, I think the Simpsons and Krav Maga have a great history. I think there's a great Simpsons episode where Lisa learns Krav Maga, and she has a great saying, saying "No groin, no Krav Maga."
Ah, yes, yeah, I remember that too. Yeah,
so the whole body language thing is, we know, enormous, right? And like the way I speak about it is that we have, part of the brain called the amygdala.
Yes.
And that the parts of the brain, the amygdala, is, some people call it the security guard, some people call it and basically it gets information at a 10 times faster than your cognitive processing. So if you're walking down the street and something comes into your senses, that's with the amygdala at one point, and then the amygdala is like the security guy at the door, and it decides who to route it to, but it's also acting at the same time.
Sure.
So if you're walking down an alleyway and you hear it's incanting, and you go, and you get an awful fright, and then later on you realize it's a cat. Your body is still acting at the thing. And the really interesting thing is your flinch responses, the way your hands go. Do we know, you think if you're walking down the street and you get a thing, you suddenly see something coming at you at the corner of your eye, your hands will go up.
Right.
Your flinch response is connected to the amygdala.
Right.
So the amygdala basically has two circuits. There's information, then it's distributed.
Yes.
One gets to your flinch, which is like milliseconds, and one gets to your cognitive processing, which is 10 times slower. So a lot of our training, so the amygdala is on understanding and cherishing this, I suppose, heritage.
Yes.
Just the genetic heritage we have, which is our survival systems. And it speaks to us through feelings.
Right.
And because the story always, how I explain it is, human beings have been around, let's say our genetic heritage around for millions of years, okay? But we're actually only able to speak for the last 80,000, 100,000 years. So a vast amount of our genetic heritage, we've been using body language and senses. And it's been shown that we can sense violent tendencies from within 80 meters.
Okay.
Just by the set of someone's jaw.
Sure.
And so it works both ways.
Yeah,
we can tell predators.
Yes.
But also we can tell victims by their body language. And basically, evolution has given both of us that skill. Sure. So our ability to read somebody through body language exists for both of us. Sometimes predators are a little bit more trusting of it.
Yes. And developmentally, we're prone, aren't we, to false positives in the sense that, those of us who assumed it wasn't dangerous when it was aren't around to tell the tale, I suppose. So we're kind of descended from paranoid people in a way that we're able to do it. But what I'm wondering is whatever about language abilities, we seem to live in a very different world nowadays where you kind of don't need your physicality so much of the time, whether it's an office job. I mean, forget about fighting even, kind of Game of Thrones times or medieval times, but even just the sense in which, you'd be farming, you'd be working down a mine, you'd be climbing trees, you'd be being chased by something, you'd be chasing something. There's a sense in which that kind of embodiment was such a core part of life for a lot of people. I mean, not everybody probably. Yeah. Where are we today? Because, I mean, the 21st century, we have this unprecedented disconnect, I suppose, from the body. And then we kind of live almost disembodied a lot of the time. And then, as you mentioned, if somebody gets attacked, this is like this rude awakening in that moment, which is supposed to be highly shocking.
Yeah, there's something. There's a lot there. Actually, there's a lot there where you just said. First of all, we actually live in the safest part of history ever.
Yeah.
Like there's some. One of the guys. It's a TED talk. He did a TED talk on this, and he basically just pointed out: try living around the time of the Crusades, to see what happens. Or try living, so we actually live in the safest time in the world, which actually means, in general, less people are harmed.
Yes.
But when it happens, it's such a shock.
Exactly.
And we're so separated from it. And we're also living in a world now, people are talking about, like I have a 19-year-old daughter, and we're living in a world where I think parents have almost harmed our children's safety. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. The days of going out and playing in the street. I'm a little bit older than you, JFL, but I'm sure you're at an age where you're allowed running around the street.
That's right.
And you met your friends. You didn't meet your friends on play dates.
Yeah.
I'm sure you don't look like you're of an age.
And there was no internet and no mobile phones.
And there was and you actually had to go out and play, and people knocked on people's doors with balls. Right. And but like my friends, and I'm my friends now, it's my peers are spending their time bringing their children on play dates. Right. They're driving their kids to school. And I remember, talking to parents who train with me. Yeah. And they are just saying, their kids, their children are so closeted. Right. That actually they've lost in some ways the ability to develop self-defense awareness because they're always being protected. And you can understand, and we can understand the parents, and I think it's the media, you know what I mean? Obviously bad things happen, and one of the things I say is bad things do happen to good people. Right. So we do need to be careful, but we do need to manage ourselves, and we do need to equip ourselves with skills and still live our life.
Sure. And this seems to go so much further than just self-defense, because to the degree we're disembodied is the degree to which we're not even emotionally in touch with ourselves. We're even if we were never to get attacked ever, if that was never to happen, if somehow we could guarantee that, isn't it to the degree we end up in the head but not in the body? There's a sense in which stress, sleep problems, so many health-related issues, I suppose, a disconnect from physicality. And I see it over and over again. People love it. You've seen me there. I have grown adults like running around in doing bear walks. You know what I mean? When I put a group of people in training, there's something amazing that goes on. And first of all, my biggest fear when I started teaching this, I was going to attract the wrong people. Yes,
and you've been there. What we've actually attracted is really nice people. Like we tend to get really, really nice people who just want to know how to protect themselves. Right. And I think when it's amazing, and as you know, I run a process, and I have a whole ritual of how I meet people at the door all the way through. So I'm their guide through this process. And to a certain extent, I talk about this idea of building a bridge to violence. Right. That violence is a tool. Yeah. And it is a tool of last resort, but it is a tool. Right. There's a lot of tools. So I've kind of this process where I teach you tools and give you the access to these tools. But during that training, I think it's very important to have fun. Yes. And to build a team. Sure. And I always, I say to people is we're the good guys. And oftentimes, sometimes going up and going to martial arts classes and Thai boxing classes and all that, it was a little bit like going to prison. You had to find out who the big guy was and hit him first, right? So that you set your mark out. Yes. Yeah. Where sometimes people are very nervous. So we have a team approach. When you join, when you come to a course or class, you are being trained with your peers. And one of the things we do is we build this very focused team effort. Yeah. Where when you're working with 3 or 4 people, you're working together. Okay. To build the skills. But one of the things I see most, and which really makes me feel good like myself, is when you look at people train each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you see men and women, and I say, remember, when you're training, you're saying your partner at your time, your wife is on the course.
That's
when
right.
you're training with somebody, you're working and investing with them to save their life.
That collaboration.
And there's something about it, you know what I mean? You can see it in people when they're stretched, you know what I mean, and they keep going. And I basically, one of the things I say is I have 10 times more belief in people's abilities than they do themselves.
Nice.
I know more than they do. I've trained 60,000 people.
Sure.
I have a research base here for this.
Absolutely.
And I don't doubt people. I had a very nice young lady on our course just this weekend. And I say she was 8 stone. And I say she was 5'3". And she was maybe 5'5" to be fair. And she was basically, I'm very nervous and I'm so afraid. And by the time she was finished, my God, she was you wouldn't want to go near that girl. You know what I mean? So one of the things about it is, back to your thing, when I'm all about self-efficacy, because, you know what I mean, which is when you teach people skills and teach people that they can, when they push themselves, do more. Yeah. Their self-confidence and their connection with their own ability grow, really, really goes up.
So, if violence or force, we can use those kinds of words, but as you said, seeing them as tools, and I suppose responsible use of tools requires a knowledge, but not just an intellectual knowledge, an experiential knowledge of how to use them so they could be deployed or not deployed, as the case may be. Right, and I can really imagine a situation where, through training, somebody is actually using less force, even in a situation where there was a problem that they didn't ask for.
That's an incredibly important point. I have a saying that sometimes I need to teach guys not to fight.
Right.
I need to teach women to fight.
Okay.
Right. We come with different...
That's a tendency you find, different interesting, tendencies.
And that's obviously a mass generalization.
Yes.
But... it's easy. Like the joke I always tell is I could go out and I could get myself into a fight here. I guarantee in 10 minutes.
You're in the right part of town.
Anywhere. I can go anywhere and I get myself into a fight. All you do is go up to some guy and start insulting his wife or his girlfriend.
The obvious side question is, do you for research?
Not for research, just for fun.
Yeah. Okay.
No, but so one of the things that you'll often have to understand is often the predators are trying to hook you. People get engaged in violence for different reasons, but sometimes everybody has a story about why. Even bad guys need a story to say why it's okay for them to do it. So they'll often try to provoke you in some way. They'll try to get you to make some move that they can interpret as disrespect.
Yes.
Or some say it wasn't your fault. You looked at them the wrong way.
Okay. Yeah.
You're wrong.
The classic.
You wore the wrong football jersey into the wrong pub.
Yeah.
Disrespecting me. It was your fault. So oftentimes with guys, like if someone wants to cause trouble, they will test you and they will try to provoke you, and your energy, I was never. There's a book I read years and years ago, and it's about negotiation strategies in Japan, and it was called Dark Face, Black Heart. And I go say, dark face, black heart, give nothing. If someone tries to provoke you, you give nothing. You never give energy out. Like you never give violence out until you give it.
So the fear in that moment on the part of the person being attacked potentially is that they're going to look weak in that moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is the argument against that?
Some women's thing is this is sometimes thing is that they're afraid that they'll get hurt more.
Right.
They're afraid that they'll provoke an assailant.
So there's two things, isn't it? There's a fear if I speak up, I'm going to provoke. There's a fear that if I do nothing, I'm going to appear vulnerable and be attacked.
Yeah, and then what you have to understand is that I think there's incredible statistics out there, particularly for women, is that you just have to understand the research. There's a lot of research in this. So first of all, the big research is the FBI did a study on the efficacy of self-defense.
Okay.
And a couple of studies, one was in Canada, and they found over a 3-year study, they found that the very fact you did a self-defense course, any course, reduced your chance of being assaulted by 50%. The second thing that they've discovered is fighting back. People who fight back in general escape more.
Okay.
And reduce the longevity or seriousness of the assault.
Okay.
And there is no correlation to fighting back and getting hurt more. So we use science to help us here.
Yes.
So basically if you're assaulted, you're threatened. You know what I mean? Like if violence does happen, fighting back is generally considered better.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, it probably is fair to say everything we've just talked about is what a person without experience is trying to think about in the moment they're getting
Yeah.
attacked.
When you're
And
going
this
to
is
the
the
faults.
problem, isn't it?
When you're going
They're
to the
trying
faults,
to they're trying to learn to drive while out on a motorway, so to speak, in real time.
Yeah, and because you've never been there before.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
our role, our job is to try and get you into the swimming
To
pool.
do that in advance. So in that, what I'm thinking about is certainly immersive training, like the type they use for emergency services.
Mm-hmm.
They have that. I'm also thinking of exposure therapy when
Yep.
working with people with phobias or
Yep.
fear. And, you know, a huge amount of the principle there, as you know, is look, we can't talk about this from a distance. This is experiential. We have to bring up the feelings to work with it.
Yep.
And what's so peculiar about that is the role of kind of intentionally leaning into certain feelings and working with them. And, you know, an example we might use of that is if you think about something you love doing, like eating your favorite food or something like that, if that's done to you forcibly against your will, you're force-fed your favorite food, even if you're hungry, that's not nice.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
really good
The
consistency.
opposite point then is some people are masochists. They
Yeah.
pay good money for fear, humiliation, pain,
Yeah,
suffering,
which,
etc.
go to a Japanese
So
tradition.
what's going on there?
Yeah.
So we've got a
Well-
situation where without choice, it's not nice. And with choice, even unpleasant things can be nice.
Yeah.
So this sense of being able to kind of lean into the feeling and work with it seems to be almost more important than the baseline feeling that's necessarily there.
Yeah, and but I think it's all about effectively. I think the term that's often used is the emotional climate that you're involved in. You know what I mean? And that you're in a scenario, and it's back to, as I said, that, you know, the fear and the aggression when you're in that, like, you have to process it.
Yes.
And what you have to, and everything you said about exposure is what I call the bridge to violence.
That's
Like,
right.
We literally and it's amazing. Like, one of the things, for example, I do is when I teach, like, you know, every week I teach, you know, weekend classes, really immersive sessions, and I just see the same things happen over and over again. And one of the times at the beginning, trying to get a normal person to hurt another person.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, most people don't want to hurt people.
As I'm thinking a Fight Club here.
Yeah,
You have to go out and start a fight. Isn't that the whole point, to desensitize them?
But I think if you go back all the way back to, they did a lot of research on this. I think Grossman was the American guy who's actually, I think he's an expert in killology.
Okay. Wow.
And
How's
he
that
was
for a
he was
PhD?
and he was a psychologist.
Can you imagine saying that at a bar?
Yeah, my PhD in philology, and I'm doing some research.
Yeah.
But he was the guy who was responsible for getting American soldiers to try to kill more.
Okay.
And one of the things he was dealing with, the research, particularly in the Second World War, was the amount of soldiers who fired a weapon who intentionally tried to harm another person was less than 10%.
Wow.
So people would shoot a weapon, but they'd shoot it in the rough direction, you know, they shoot wildly. But only 10% of the shots fired had intention.
Oh my gosh.
No, and like, you've got to see that. Obviously, depends on the circumstance, but that's a very good thing in life. You know,
Yes.
like, that's a good thing. That these guys who were trained soldiers, they did not want to harm another person.
It's fascinating.
So that is a really good thing that I think it's important to understand. So he basically fixed that, unfortunately, and he would use things like words like, if innocent people are hurt, it's not called innocent people being hurt, it's called collateral damage.
Okay. So that
We start to
reframe
use,
it.
we disassociate.
Yeah.
We're actually using the same language that the Nazis used.
Right.
And the same process is the same process of disassociation. You know what I mean? Where you take people, if you take it all the way now, where people are killing people using Predator missiles from 6,000 miles away.
And this is where it bridges it with computer games, obviously, in a kind of Call of Duty kind of era. And I mean, I suppose I grew up playing Street Fighter, but I don't think that did anything for my street fighting, you know, so there's not an obvious necessary connect there. But with certain skills, you can. If you can imagine somebody who's like aiming and shooting the whole time, you can kind of imagine them snapping to more when they're doing that in real life.
You've got both, isn't it? You've got both. Isn't it, what's the guy's name? Gavin de Becker. He was one of the world's experts on violence. And he's absolutely convinced. He's well respected. He wrote a great book called The Gift of Fear. It's a book I reference a lot. He talks about intuition. He talks about another great book called Protecting the Gift.
Okay.
Which is about, look, now he's one of these guys that talks a lot about how we're overprotecting our children.
Right.
Not teaching them tools for safety.
Right.
And then as they get older, and they're on their own, they become more anxious.
Sure.
And he is absolutely convinced that computer games make people more violent.
Because there's a huge dispute on that, and there seem to be two big camps in
Absolutely.
that debate.
Yeah, there are,
and
yeah.
I think one of them, I just read an American Psychological Association article there recently, which was trying to make some sense of where that's at the moment. And
Yeah.
they were coming down on the side of the positive effects of video games too.
Yeah, and the skill building.
And the skill building. But the big point that we're making is, look, it's untenable at this stage in the game to actually call computer games one thing.
Yeah,
Isn't it? They're saying it's like calling life one thing. There's that many types and subtypes.
And there's different computer games. There's a very big difference between playing Minecraft,
yes,
which all the kids I'm watching and going around where you're actually playing a game where you're pumping a machine gun into somebody.
That's right.
And there is a thing: are you inoculating yourself to violence?
That's
You know
right.
what I mean? And it's all the way back to now. Like if you take it all the way to the other experiences, we've got the whole fear around the ready availability of porn.
That's right.
And the impact that it's having, again, it's very early days.
That's right.
You know what I mean? But, I hope no under 18s listen to this, but, you can get access to porn.
Sure. No, it's changed.
I know You'd be one of those old-fashioned parents who'd be locking my internet.
Yeah.
But so the question we have to ask ourselves is, does the access to porn impact people's sexual behavior? And I think there's very little doubt in that.
And there is, and the problem is a lot of this is it's only kind of in the end game that you really find out the effects of these things, isn't it? You've got to try and think ahead as best you can.
Yeah.
A bit like our point about feelings. There's also an interesting point about whether it's the video games or whether it's anything else of our intention towards them. Because somebody could be playing Call of Duty, but they could be kind of walking, enjoying the jungles around them and looking around.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody else could be playing Minecraft but building weapons within it and trying to fight. There's an interesting way in which we can use
how
tools.
do you adapt?
And even these games like kind of Fallout or Skyrim, where you can take different roles and different characters, and you can kind of have your own inner narrative as well that, okay, sure, I'm using force, but I'm using it to save people. You can add that in even if it's not said explicitly in the game.
And you've got problem solving. I'm a great fan of Fallout. And but I think when I think, as you said, what's this thing? It makes, there's some argument about people say about money. It makes you more of who you are.
Very good, Jim.
Yeah, you know what I mean. And if you have a tendency, and then you can veer towards this thing. But just back to Bandura's famous experiments in social learning theory, the famous bashing they gave kids games to play.
Right, yeah.
And then one of the games was, a teacher bashing a stick against.
We'll put a link to a video.
Bashing a stick against thing. And when the kids went to play, they did what the parents did, or did what the adults. So the games, there's lots of games available, and one tended to be more violent, and then so we tend to do what the whole social proof concept that goes on around us.
Yes. So inevitably, there's going to be people who say, yeah, you know what, we're too soft. We need to get out there and fight a bit more. There's going to be other people who are going to say, oh no, that doesn't sound very nice. What could we say for the role of as a parent or just as a person, where we seem to want a society that's progressive enough that we're not all hitting each other over the head every so often, just for no good reason at all. Mm-hmm. We do seem to want that in some shape or form. But at the same time, as you said, we want a sense of groundedness around body. We want to understand and know the tools we have in terms of the ability to use force, to use it or not, as the case may be, to appropriately understand it. How can we have as much peace as possible but still be grounded in our own ability to use force?
I think it's, it's the whole... you might be number thing is the whole philosopher warrior concept. Like I think people thought, I'm a great fan of the Stoics, also. And they talk about the philosopher as a warrior and the philosopher as a librarian.
Right. Yeah.
And these days, the philosopher is a librarian. You wouldn't recognize a philosopher if you're back with hanging around Socrates. They were very active. They were at the same time they're off wrestling, and they were very active, and they didn't just think. So I think about understanding. I think we've got to see life in a whole wide nearer dimension. And I think you're entitled to nothing. I think safety is a construct. I think all these things are social constructs. And then when the rules of society break down, and they can break down in a moment, or they break down in a place, then different behaviors. And I think you need to be a well-rounded person, and one of the things I'm proud of is when I walk people through, being able to, and I teach people how to operate in the face of violence, and how to control themselves. Like one of the things I talk about is I don't fight monkeys. People always ask me, do you get into things? No, I don't. I don't fight monkeys. Because most of the time when people get into violence, it's monkey fighting. Like it's i.e. that's the part of the brain
Sure.
that they're using.
Sure.
You looked at me, you looked
Sure.
at him, you pushed me. And I have a rule, and the way it's like an intervention I do for myself, and it comes from a psychotherapy model called Name Your Gremlins concept, which is, you create a picture of the behavior you don't want, so you can think. And my rule is I don't fight monkeys. And what it means is, when I say if somebody comes up to me in a bar, which doesn't happen, or something, and they're kind of shouting at me, that's a monkey.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
and what I'd say to you, if you're walking through the zoo with your children and your wife, and a monkey got out of the cage and started insulting you,
Yeah.
and calling you, all these different names and insulting your wife, would you fight the monkey or call the zookeeper? You know what I mean? And basically what I would do is I'd call the zookeeper and get him to get his tranquilizer gun, stick the guy back in his cage.
Yeah.
So I think you balance that. I don't fight monkeys.
Nice point.
So and the other question I ask people is, the world, bad things can happen to good people. Just you were naive not to accept that. So what can you do to give yourself and your family the best possible chance?
Right.
Like you buy your health insurance, you buy your car insurance, you learn to swim, you take first aid. This is skills you can do, so that you can act in a moment, and you take preemptive action. And then if we can make it fun, like we do a lot of fitness training, so we try it, and we do a lot of social things. So basically, to me, that's becoming a well-rounded person. And the more skills you have, the more situations, and skills cross over. We know this. So you go and you learn to learn self-defense, and you learn how to deal with, which we teach how to deal with some guy shouting in your face. Yeah, you can those skills. They transfer.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You're dealing with an awkward client now.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Those and there's something else, and I think it's back to self-efficacy.
Yes.
When you act and you show yourself you can act, you believe you can do more.
Yes. And this we kind of stretch beyond sometimes the point we want to be at an average, isn't it? And that's certainly something I've seen in your work, and it's a principle that seems to stand true time and time again. Yeah. Is that you can imagine the example of your man who comes back from Nam, and he's been through that, and then he has to have a kind of just a small conflict with somebody at a bus stop. Yeah. And there's a sense in which it's been stretched so far that there's a sort of a breathing room, isn't there? That this is very much, the context has completely shifted in that moment. Yeah. So equally, if you're having a negotiation in the workplace, but you've just been out there getting physical with somebody, it does seem to stretch it and ground it and balance it in a sense.
And that whole thing, and you've got this, I think, so there's two things back to the NAM thing. When people say, when I teach people what violence is really like, most people say I never want to go there. Right. You know what I mean? I was doing some stuff for the Jason Bourne movie and recently, and they said to me, "We really want you to do some real street fighting." I says, "No, you don't." Even Jason Bourne is in a movie.
It doesn't look like The Matrix, does it?
No, it does. But no, you don't, because I'm going to tell you something. Yeah. You ever see real violence? It's sickening. Right. You know what I mean? It's sickening. Yes. It's actually, if you ever see another person, like we all think we do it, but if you see it like an MMA thing go past the sport, we're repulsed. So I think it's a really interesting thing. I remember I was very, very, I won't say who it was, but a very, very well-known guy. I'm sure you know him. And he's a great person, just I don't have his permission to say his name now. Yeah. And he's in your field, and he's in the UK. And he's trained with me quite a bit. And I actually trained with him originally in NLP. And he's a great guy. Yeah. And he came over, and if you're listening to this, you know who you are. But and he's a good guy. And I basically said to him one day, he said, "Oh yeah, I've just learned all these skills, and I kind of want to get into a fight." And I said to him, "Okay, so let's picture the fight." Yeah. And I says, "Okay, now picture the blood on your hands. Now picture the guy's face being smashed up. Now fast forward to see your man's family look at you do this. Now fast forward to the court case. Fast forward to you in the court with the blood in your hands." I says, "Okay, I don't want to fight anymore." You know what I mean? I think one of the things we have to do is understand consequential thinking.
Very nice.
And I think it's a bit like when you understand something. And a really interesting talk yesterday with a guy, and we're talking about I think you'll know this principle maybe better than me to name it, but the principle is that people who are truly, truly expert are less confident
That's right. Oh, I forget the name. I'll
Doesn't
put a link
find
to
it, but
yes, that's
it's
right.
a really, really interesting thing. You know,
So exactly,
they don't
the
talk,
less they know, the greater the confidence.
Yeah.
There's a reverse correlation.
So the less cocky
Yeah.
they become.
That's right.
They tend to talk more in percentages.
Sure.
They tend to be more in likelihoods. And unfortunately, we don't like that. When you go to a doctor and you say, well, doc, you know, and how's it going? He says, well, you know,
Yes,
50% this. No, tell me
Yes,
everything
yeah.
for certain.
Yeah,
doc.
yeah.
And I was talking to a French doctor who did my course yesterday. And he said something which I was just chatting to him about that concept. He brought it up and he says, the more you know, he says, the more you learn, particularly about the human body, the more humble you become.
Right.
I just thought that was really,
very
really
nice point.
really interesting. And he was saying that, and this guy I say was in his 50s, consultant doctor, and he was saying, yeah, you know, the more I've learned, the more humble I become.
And you see that a lot of the time demonstrated in the classic 80s martial arts movie, isn't it? Because, you know, your man's at the bar, somebody goes up, the monkey point you were making, you know, giving him hassle, and, you know, pours a drink in his face, and he does absolutely nothing. Isn't it? Now, of course, through repeated provocation and the need to save other people, he ends up having to save the town. But even at the very end of the movie, isn't it, when, you know, there's a final, you know, knockout punch or something to happen, there's always a moment of redemption where he kind of gives the other guy a chance, but the other guy goes for him, and then he has to take him down in that way. So that principle, I suppose, to some degree, we have been enculturated with a little bit, if we can put it into practice.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's a very good point. I think, you know, like as I said, we don't want to do it, but to have the capacity to do it. So I actually always ask people, very simple, what will you die for? What? Just understand this. Just understand. Just think for a second and process it now.
Yes, yeah.
Just and I ask people, would you die for your house? Would you die for a pint of beer? Would you die over a look? And people say to me, of course I wouldn't. No, I says, I want you to think about all the violence that happened in Dublin last night. And I want you to tell me, what was that in this world? Yeah. In the world with so many things going on, there were people engaging in violence last night. And what were they fighting over? Right. And it was monkeys fighting. Right. And they were fighting over a look, you know, some perceived slight, or to take something, but it was monkey fighting. And I always, so I processed that myself, and I says, what will you die for? Yeah. And what will you kill for?
Well, how nice to bring that intentionality in a calm moment and decide that in advance. I don't know. So rather than trying to make up our policies as we go along in the moment, when we can't think clearly. Yeah, exactly. Because like, and there's a very interesting. Come back to a second. But when you know what you'll die for, you know what you'll kill for. Right. Right. And I'd say I'm not going to die over a pint of beer. Absolutely. I'm not going to somebody steal. I remember telling a story years ago in Kyo's in St. Anne Street. I went in and it'd been late in the evening, and my friends were there, and I just went in. I was late, and I just ordered a beer, a pint of Guinness or something, and I'd ordered and I just and I used to work in London, and I just turned around and I'd ordered my beer, and I just saw this hand sneak up and take my beer and sneak, you know, just like it was like some of a cartoon movie, just slither away with my pint of beer. And I'm just looking at this, and I just look at this guy, and I look at the barman and says, "You seeing this?" And we both have a laugh, and the man says, "Hey, you." But I guarantee you, somebody else would have thought that was worth fighting over. You know what I mean? I laughed at. So here's what we do: for what you'd kill for, what you die for, and what you laugh at. Wow. Wow. You know what I mean? What a great exercise. Yeah. So and make those, just you said, and you know, set your intention. That's right. Your intention behavior. Right. So my view of it is, if some monkey comes in, I don't fight monkeys for a start. I have these rules. You know what I mean? I don't die over pints of beer. Yes. Because to fight is to risk death. Right. Right. To fight is to risk real harm to you or somebody else, either in that moment or in a loop back to revenge. Beautiful. And we have to understand these things. Yeah. Fighting as a physical act. Of course, there seems to be a bit of a gradient or a line, because, of course, we might use words in certain cases. And you know the way there's two extremes, even just with words. We wouldn't seem to want to live in a world where, you know, people hurt other people, or even, you know, offended other people, certainly robbed from other people, or even just socially pushed in front of an old person in a queue or things like that. And we just looked away. It would seem that society's role in some way is to kind of correct and balance on some level, but yet on the other hand, your point about not engaging unnecessarily in conflict and escalation is an important one too. Yeah. Any thoughts on where we find that balance? I think society, I think there's some really, really interesting stuff about that. Society tends to have corrective behavior.
And and there's lots of study about tribesmen, and I'm sure you've seen this stuff about guys who don't pull their weight in the hunt.
Right.
And that the way and we chide people. Like you can see
Yes,
how people have weight.
Yeah.
Gossip is another tool.
Yeah.
So some people talk about gossip was the origination of gossip was is if there was some big biff of a guy that you wouldn't want to confront everyone. The gossip was a way of spreading information about this person. Or another way, get myself into trouble. Get myself into trouble in this, but there's a bit of a sense that how women damage people is they damage people. Men have a tendency to violence, and women's violence is true language.
Well, I know you've got some very tough female trainers I've worked with before, so I'm sure they'll take you up on that if there's any issue.
They'll talk bad about you and kick your ass. So I think there's a lot going on there, but I think we have corrective mechanisms, and I think society has corrective mechanisms, and like I think the world is such a complicated place. We used to think it was okay to slap a child.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I certainly tell you, I know my mum thought it was okay.
Yeah.
Like it might be on the backside.
Huge shift.
And we have had this huge shift, and we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Because I would say, so this is like, and this is like one of those really, really, really grey areas where you think are very unpopular. We don't know. People don't slap their children on the bottom anymore.
Sure.
And we don't know. Because I guarantee you, for most of society, we slap children on the bottom.
Yeah, well, that's true. Certainly, the kind of the mainstream is certainly going down against it. There's no doubt in terms of
And I'm
most,
not in any way. I'm asking the question.
No, absolutely.
I certainly have never, ever laid my hand on my daughter.
Yeah,
so I'd be punished to all end.
Well, it gets back to that point of experiencing physicality, because again, you want to have the experience of it to some degree. You want to have the world push back when you push it. Sometimes, again, even from the point of view of narcissism, which is a popular topic, isn't it? There's a sense in which there need to be some feedback mechanisms.
Yeah, and there's also this. Sorry, there's this kind of Zeigarnik effect, with this open loop concept. So if you're going around and you become fixated about the possibility, if you're a smaller person or something has happened to you, that opens up a loop which drains you.
Right.
And I've developed my own theory. I suppose not even a theory, but I suppose a rule of thumb I'm using.
Yes.
Is that if you are confronted with a risk or a problem and you don't have a strategy to deal with it, it stays with you and it drains you.
Okay.
So if you're afraid of being attacked, that's opened up a loop in your brain. And that's taken some of your cognitive load, cognitive pressing. But when you go and you solve that problem, when you go and you take action, and you build a skill, that now if this happens, this is what I will do. I believe it closes the loop, and that's the kind of my interpretation.
I see what you mean. Yeah,
I don't know if you know the Zeigarnik, very quickly, the Zeigarnik effect.
Sure, go for it.
It came out of Russian tea houses, and it was about basically when something happened, how it stayed in our brain. And the idea was that they looked at waiters, and it was the whole concept of an open loop. When they had huge Russian tea houses, and when they had placed an order, you could go up to that waiter, and he could tell you. He could tell you that exactly what his open orders were, but the minute he served the table, he had no idea what he had.
Okay.
So there's this: the brain somehow works in open loops, and I believe, my interpretation of that is that, and I think if you have an argument, another example is if you have an unresolved argument with somebody,
right,
that weighs on you. There's something going on that.
So these are kind of programs running in the background, using a bandwidth, so to speak.
Exactly, using a bandwidth. And I think if you have an anxiety, if you have a fear about that you might be assaulted, or if you have a fear, that program, that stress loop is running in the back. When you take action, you close the loop.
Which unfortunately can be a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes, can't it?
Because your body language, then, because as you said, you then become anxious. Your body, you affect your physiology. Yeah. You make yourself sick. Yeah. Can make yourself sick. You affect your demeanor, and therefore that demeanor tends to attract predators.
There's a kind of a cumulative and a bit of compound interest on some of them too, isn't it? That it just keeps going on in a certain direction. Yeah. So a thing we've kind of met, I suppose, in a couple of ways so far is this difference between maybe an emotion that comes forward and then response to it in some way. And there seems to be a sense in which we can't necessarily help the first, and though with training over time, I suppose we can modify emotional responses, but certainly we have a freedom to respond one way or the other.
Yeah.
There's also extended from that this sense of acting from different places, and something you'll be well familiar with are shock and awe tactics.
Yeah.
So that's interesting because you'll have let's say military team, or you'll have a car full of detectives or whoever who will pull in front of a vehicle, let's say a car full of drug dealers or something. They'll get out, they'll smash the windscreen, and they'll shout while doing it. The understanding being that they'll trigger a freeze response to actually make it safer for everybody involved in the stop. Now, the interesting bit there, though, is they'll plan that over coffee weeks in advance.
Yeah.
So there seems to be this interesting thing of strong action from a calm place.
Yeah.
Or its opposite
Turning
that
the
can
switch,
be played with. And I think a lot of the time we have, from a vulnerable place, action or inaction, isn't it, rather than the sense of calmness and then deploying force or non-force, or maybe somewhere in the middle, which is probably hard to achieve from a non-calm place.
And I think, it's an interesting way to look at it. But the thing is, as you said, you're usually pretty calm before you bring a tactic, especially when it comes out of nowhere. So it's the ability to switch.
Yes.
And again, we were talking about this last night, is I think there's a couple of different things there. Like, I'm a great fan of this. The American military used this model called the OODA Loop to very simply explain how the brain works.
Yes.
And what they do is, I'll give it a quick.
Sure.
In my course, I do this little game. Sure, you remember, where I get people to pretend they're facing somebody they've never met before in their life, and I pretend you're walking down the street and you meet they're your best friend.
Right.
And you have to role play the best friend.
Okay.
And people have never met this person before, and they're hugging them. Hugging a stranger. And then I say, okay. Change the scenario. You're with the same partner, but this time it's somebody you've never met before, and you're having going for a work interview.
Yeah.
Go up and say hello to them. And exactly the same person, and the way they behave with that person is fundamentally different.
Wow.
And then I say to people, so what was different? Oh, I says, well, it's a different person. No, it's the same person. What was different? And the meaning.
Yeah.
They put on the places what they've. And what I point out to them, I got you to hug a stranger by controlling the frame.
Right, right.
I actually got you to think you were acting instinctively, but in reality, you're acting. So there's this whole idea of the body instinctively reacts based on the frame.
Sure.
And we think it's not just instinctive; it's based on a frame. And one of the things that linking that with another idea is how people think, and that's the OODA loop, which is observe, orientate, decide, act. That's a thinking model used by the US Air Force. And what they say is, in order to understand the situation, you first have to observe it. And then you have to orientate to it. Then you have to decide what to do, and then you act. So it's the OODA loop.
Yep.
And if you interrupt that loop at any point, you just have to go back to the start.
Okay.
So let's think about it. A bad guy sees you through his OODA loop. He's observed you.
Yeah.
And now he's orientated to you as a potential victim. He's decided what to do, and he attacks you. Now, in that moment, you act. And now he had a script. He had a script that said, your job is to screw up the script. Yes. And you want to activate his OODA loop again. Right, so if he comes in, puts you in a headlock, and you do a response to a headlock, which is pretty much ingrained in most people, he's got to go. He's basically saying, oh shit, you know what I mean? Who is this person? So very few people attack people they think are going to beat them up. Right.
Some deep psychology there.
Very few people. So you have to understand.
Yeah.
He picked you because he thought he could take you.
Right.
Your job is to dissuade him of that as quickly as possible. And when I talk about that's your job. Your job is to make him go away. Sure. And the way I talk about you, basically, your job is to inflict as much fear, harm, and damage until they go away. That's what you're doing. You know,
and methods for that can include confusion as well, isn't it? And when you talk about knocking off that script, essentially.
Yeah, that we talk about the interview. We talk about that people, when they're looking at for the victim, they have certain behaviours they'll engage in to assess your victim score.
Right.
How high are you on the victim
credit
scale?
rating, essentially, if you're applying for a mortgage.
Exactly. And one of those things is an inappropriate abuse of space.
Okay.
You know, we talk about back to this idea how much space is appropriate. Now, of course, you can be on a a packed train, or but it's a very big difference. The way I always say to guys is, if you go to Croke Park and you go to use the loo, like, it's okay to be crowded.
Yeah.
If you walk into a loo and there's 15 places
There's a
and somebody goes
context to
beside
it.
you,
Yeah.
so basically, space is situational. And and basically the big idea we have is understanding that there is a process to picking a victim.
Right.
And remember, your job is to make them not see you as a victim.
Right.
And and there's ways you can do that. There's everything from, and the best way to do that is to understand how these guys operate. So, for example, use of space.
Yeah.
Use of space, and other things like which I'm very keen of is the use of particularly male and female assaults. Is this idea of forced rapport. And the big story is from Gavin de Becker's book. It was about this poor woman, and she was going up her living in an apartment in New York, and this is the basis of his book, The Gift of Fear. And she was going up, and she basically had our shopping, and she's going up the stairwell, and she kind of has this kind of the bags burst and the tin cans go rolling down the stairs, and she's going, oh shit. And then the next minute, she hears a voice, very nice, "It's okay, I've got them." And she goes in her body, her amygdala, it's going, "There's something not right here." But this charming guy bounds up the stairs, with her lost cans, and he basically says, "Here we are." And her body is going, her body is going, "No, no, no." But he's going, "Look, I've got your stuff." And then she says, he says, "Okay, come on, where's your apartment? I'll help you. I'll carry them to you." And she's going, "No, no, no." But he's saying, "Come on, we've got it." And he looked at the famous line is, he looked at the tin of food he was having and says, "Look, we have a hungry cat to feed." So he did this thing called forced teaming. And it basically got them to say, we have a common problem to solve.
I see.
And that's, if you ever think about it, in the real world, when we solve problems together, we get to like people.
Sure.
So it's what we call you have to watch out for the four. So our body is telling her one thing, which is get away from this guy, but the behavior is telling her another. So you've got this dissonance.
Absolutely.
And cognitive dissonance,
not wanting to seem impolite.
And oh my God, he seems so nice. And the one thing I always say to women is, in sexual assaults, the thing that most women say about the stranger was, "He seems so nice." So if you find, I have still little things going on. So watch out for forced teaming. So you don't want help, and someone continues to give you help, they're not helping you.
Sure.
Right. So the second idea is trust your body. Always trust your body more than anything else. Don't trust the voice, because it's new. The body's 800,000. The body's 5 million years old.
Yeah.
The body talk. the mind talk is 100,000 years. It's a kid.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to make scenes. The body doesn't care. Second thing is this concept called the no tripwire, which I think is one of the most powerful things we teach, is that if you've said no to somebody and they push through that no, that should be like a tripwire going off, like an alarm. Like spies have tripwires.
Yes.
Military have units. They put tripwires around at the bases. So if you've said no, thank you, I don't want to drink, and that person forced to drink on you. If you said no, I don't want you to come to my door, and they force. So someone who ignores your no is trying to control you. And what we want to have is these insights to behavior, so that basically you understand space, that they should only be in a certain space. If they basically tried to force team you and your body says no, no. If you say no and they push you that no, these are points of escalation for you.
Wonderful.
So,
and this is what you're kind of painting a map of, I suppose. There is applied consent, what this really means in practice. And, I suppose to be good at that requires not necessarily something that's difficult, but something that we have to have developed, which is a sense of our own autonomy, our own agency, our own space in the world. And the problem is that doesn't always happen, isn't it? We end up just... if you think about our upbringing with parents, teachers, friends, society, religion, media, culture, advertising, etc., and we kind of end up at a certain point where we hopefully wake up at a certain point and go, who the hell am I and where am I going? Now, that can be quite existential, but it's also quite practical, because when you find yourself in one of those situations you're describing, suddenly all of that is called into question. Where are these lines? Where can I say yes or no? Am I being impolite? Am I doing the wrong thing? That's going to remind you subconsciously of childhood, where you didn't say thank you to somebody who helped you, or you were given out. It gets kind of complicated, isn't it? Unless we've asked those questions and explore the rules.
And I think one of the most important rules, and I think this is a rule of life, as I said, I've trained as a therapist myself, and I've done a lot of work in performance coaching. It's being okay with being wrong.
Right.
Being okay with being wrong.
Important point.
Being okay with being wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like the growth mindset. I'm sure you come across Caroline Dweck and her whole growth mindset.
Wonderful stuff.
The single biggest thing is you're being okay with things not working.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fear of failure, fear of being wrong is the single biggest thing that holds people back.
Yes, absolutely.
And being okay with being wrong, being okay with like understanding there are rules, and being okay that sometimes you might be seen to be a little bit overreactive.
Yeah,
as long as you don't hit someone. And being okay with being rude. Like one of my, like I my poor wife, I've kind of set of rules, and like I'm a real believer in manners. I'm a real believer in manners, because I think manners are a real indicator of respect for another person,
right,
or unwillingness to cause offence.
Absolutely.
That does not mean a manly person's a good person.
Yeah, true.
But if there's an absence of manners,
yeah,
that's a good indicator.
Yes.
Presence of manners is not necessarily.
Yeah.
But absence is you know, is like what's necessary but not sufficient.
That's
you know what
right. I mean?
Yeah. But so I'm a real believer in manners. So if manners get lapse, I might pay attention. Because I think they're the first thing to go. And so I'm a big believer, if I feel someone's been quite unmanly and rude or something, I just pay a bit more attention to them, because that could be an indicator. Obviously, the other thing about being okay with no is basically to have your lines, you know, to have your boundaries, and to know where your boundaries are. And to practice, like the single biggest thing is, you know, like this whole kind of being true to yourself. That people sometimes don't know their boundaries. I don't said you do know them, but you don't set their boundaries, and they allow themselves to get walked on, and you know. So I think having good boundaries, understanding manners, understanding these systems, and understanding that most people who attack people are basically cowards, because they're not going to pick on someone.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Could you, this is a big topic, but in your experience, what can we say about the mindset of the attacker? We've talked about the attackee for a while there and some of their options and consent, but the attacker, who is this? Are we dealing with a lot of different types of people who are doing the same thing for different reasons, or is there some kind of aggregate trend there that you see, that you've come across?
I think when it comes to violence, the thing you got to understand is they think they're right. You're in different worlds. They think they're right. Very few people who engage in violence regret it. They don't wake up and say, "Oh, I'm sorry I did that." Right. No, like, I'm not talking about a drunken fight with somebody. I'm talking about someone who people engage in repeatedly.
Yes. Yeah.
They just see it, and they will dehumanize. They you know, what's the word? They you know, like this happens in the world all over. It's called, you know, othering is what we do. You know, all these studies where they put the kids in the school camps into different groups, right? And the women are great friends, just put them in another group, and you know you're another. That's and right. We have othering all over. So people will always put you, if they want to harm you, they'll put you into another. Gotcha. And that other can be religion. See a lot of that going on in the world at the moment. The other could be a football jersey. Like I'm a great fan. I lived in London. I have loads and loads of English friends, but I'm sorry. Come 2 weeks' time, there's a rugby match coming on. when I'm in a green jersey and that guy's in a white jersey, there's a bit of othering going on. You know, you're no longer my mate. You are my you're my enemy. Yeah. So you have to. That is the way we work. Tribalism, othering. So people put you into different tribes. But then they also have other things, which I think is very important, is to understand. So you've got othering, which is one idea. So they've literally put you into a tribe in their mind that you don't count. This is how Nazism did what it did. This is how we see what's going on in the world. There's a lot of othering going on all over the world in foreign policy in countries. And then we've got situations where people just have learned that violence is a tool for them that works. So it's worked for them, and it's also their go-to strategy. And even in that moment, do you think that's sort of subconscious in a sense that they're not really thinking about it, or is it just that they prioritize their gain above another person's suffering? Yeah, I think the most important thing as I come back to is disassociation. They don't consider your suffering. Like we saw, it's not considered. They don't consider. Okay. They don't see it as as part of the same on the same model. Right. They don't see there's a minus for you and a plus for them. Sure. They see it as two different, and they're on two different polarities.
It's a bit like some of John Sewler's work on the online disinhibition effect, how people via the internet will do all kinds of things, whereas to face-to-face they would never consider it. But just this removal, as I say, creates a disassociation.
I have to manage my mood sometimes, and I remember like people sometimes come onto my Facebook page and say horrible things.
Yes.
And I did it once, and it says 29 Avenue Road, pop down.
I work with plenty of small business owners who have, TripAdvisor or reviews or things like this is a common theme.
And it's back, but guess what this is? Disassociation.
Yes.
So you're putting that, and you put a bit of people being anonymous here as well. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how people can be
true.
And there's a big debate. You mentioned TripAdvisor. There's a big debate about this. About that. Surely, if you go to court, you can confront your accuser.
Yes.
Is it fair that a stranger can go on and anonymously?
You should at least be able to rate them, or other people should.
Rate them. Like you can see that, like an Uber, for example. You can
a two-way system.
Goes two-way system. So it is true, and there's no credentials like with these things that somebody can. I think that's the way the world is going at the moment. Somebody can anyone can say anything.
Yes.
You got the whole fake news idea. We're going off into different tangents, but
it all tie in.
It sets the
complex.
Frame. Yeah. It sets fear, creates fear in people's mind. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I think it's hilarious to have Irish people go on about those damn immigrants.
Yeah,
the Irish people who are the biggest immigration across the planet, and we because we weren't immigrants, like we were Irish.
So the otherness you're talking about, the disinhibition, it is true, isn't it? We seem to have the ability to put people into different categories and move completely in and out of different emotional profiles. Then as a result of doing it, and as you mentioned, we can even switch people from one category to the other, which is amazing. But in some ways, although that's kind of terrifying, it's also kind of promising because it sort of points to the ability we have within ourselves to change it. Because in those cases, you're not actually changing the reality necessarily, like your example of your training. It's the same person either way, but it shows that if appropriately trained and cultivated, that we ourselves can adjust perspective quite rapidly.
But it's also to understand that you have cognitive biases.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You have the ways of behaving, and there are processes for building trust.
Yes, yeah.
And it's quite I think you should be suspicious. I think there's times for being suspicious. Yeah. And there's times for being I think if you're a guy or a woman going home late at night, you should see the world through a little bit of a pessimistic lens.
True.
You know what I mean?
True.
Back to Jill Maher.
Sure.
Like she came out and she had just had a lovely night out, and so the frame that she saw the world on was probably the world's a great place, lovely people, everybody's this whole idea of emotional contagion, that you've been just have great fun, you're in a great humor, therefore the world is a lovely place.
There seems to be a big difference between risk assessment and paranoia, doesn't there? If you think about like conspiracy theory thinking versus just being prepared, they seem to be two different things. Because like, for example, with fire extinguishers, any good company is going to have the fire extinguishers in place. Now, you don't think about this constantly. You don't go around spraying them the whole time, but you don't not have them either, isn't it? There's a consciousness around it. You kind of think about it occasionally. You do your checks. Yeah,
and I think risk assessment is cognitive and paranoia is emotional.
Right. Yeah,
and I think, and it's just a funny story. When I did practice as a therapist, I really used to only do it with people who had trained. This guy I had trained came to me and he basically saw the world in a very, very negative view. He was always afraid. And what I did was, as an interim exercise, I got him to think about. Do you remember the Terminator?
Yes.
The movie in Terminator used to have a threat assessment.
Right. Yeah.
And what I got him to do was, as he walked through the world, if he saw a threat, I'd get him to score the threat. And then I'd say, but a rational score on it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So your instinct is this is 10 out of 10. Now let's just evaluate the location, the reality, and then he would just dial back to threat.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Brilliant.
And it was an intervention. So what that big to me, his basically his paranoia was emotional.
Sure.
And then we engage rational brain, and then you can practice that. And I think risk. I am, and this is one of the things that surprises people. I am much more careful than most people. And I, for example, I know there are certain points of risk.
Sure.
That and I talk about the whole idea of planning and planning going home. I says if I was going to mug somebody. If you think about it, if you're going to mug you, where would you mug you?
Yeah, there's better and worse places.
Where are you going to mug you? And people say to me, well, if I was going to mug somebody, what would you do? And they'd say, where would you go? And I said, what I would do is I'd learn from polar bears. And I remember watching what polar bears used to do. One of a polar bear's hunting strategy is to go and find an air hole where a seal has to come up. And what the polar bear doesn't wander around looking for seals.
Right.
He goes to an air hole.
Yeah.
And he waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits. And one day, maybe over a 2-day window, the seal comes up. When the seal commits to the air hole, it's so thick, it actually can't get back down again.
Gotcha.
So wouldn't you go and find a good place to attack someone and wait there?
That's what they do in online video games at the spawn point where players respawn. They just wait there and take them out as they come in, get their scores up. Yeah.
That's exactly what I remember that one. But you know what I mean? So does crime happens in certain places?
Exactly.
And crime happens down laneways for a reason, because there's no one around. And because it's isolated.
Yes.
So if you go and you put yourself into a place where crime happens, the chance of crime happening to you is higher. So we know that laneways, we know that these are dangerous. We know that at a point in time in the world, these things happen. Crimes happen at this time. Then we can avoid those.
So in a sensitivity to that, and I think, somebody could kind of look at it, I think, wrongly from the outside and say, this sounds like an awful lot of overthinking. Now, of course, it may be worth it if it protected you anyway. But I think there's actually a further point that it isn't. It may actually involve less thinking, but just an awareness, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think you build habits.
It's not that you're, thinking, because actually the opposite can happen, isn't it? You're spending so much time thinking about danger, you're not aware in the environment you're in. And ironically, you're in another world, distracted away from the one you're in. Yeah. So it's a kind of an awareness of the present.
I think I have a couple of things on that. I'm a friend I'm doing a course online at the moment on philosophy, and I'm a great fan of Stoics.
Brilliant,
and it comes back from one of my biggest lessons in life is when you have nothing. I had like a big challenge about 15 years ago, and I pretty much lost everything. And it was the best thing ever happened to me.
Okay.
And then I spent 2 years living in Africa with 3 pairs of jeans and 3 or 4 t-shirts. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
And so I'm a great believer in it. So when it comes to the Stoics, like my view in life is the survival rate from life is 0. You're not getting out.
That's the best case
You're
scenario.
getting out, so you're getting out. You're getting out.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you get out?
Yeah.
And when do you get out?
Right.
And like any game, you're playing a game.
Yeah.
Like, you're playing a game. This game called life. And there's things you can do that gives you, and it's about the experience. Like, do you, like as I said, do you can contribute to the world? Do you give? You know what I mean? Are you a good, because that's the way we're wired. Yeah. We're happier. All the research, you know this better than I do, I'm sure. All the research shows we're happier when we're helping people.
That's right.
All the research.
We're designed to be pro-social. It's not even pro-social. We're part of part isn't it? No person is an island.
Yeah, we want to be remembered.
Absolutely.
And I think it's all this thing as and karma does work. I'm blessed. I'm blessed with the amount of, I teach people how to fight. And I'm blessed with the amount of really positive things that have happened in my life for that. You know what I mean? Wow. For that. And it's not I teach people how to fight. I teach people how to control themselves. You know what I mean? And so it's back to that. So the survival rate from life is 0. Like you're going to get it. So it's about playing the game. Wouldn't you want to stock the odds in your favor?
Yes.
And I have health insurance. I could do with losing a few pounds, but I still go to the gym. Yeah. I don't smoke.
It's all muscle, yeah.
I don't smoke, muscle potentiation. Yeah. I don't smoke. I exercise. I engage in positive life experiences to reduce stress. Yeah. I engage in a bit of mindfulness, all the because I want to be around. I want to be here. Yeah. And one of those things is I'm making sure someone doesn't snatch me from this without snatch me, because the other thing you have to remember, when you get attacked, it's not just you being attacked, it's your family. And this is what I say, if someone, God forbid, you've got a wife and you've got children. So we can talk about the harm that goes on if someone, I hope you still have your training. Absolutely. And you do a refresher. But I remember we have a refresher class, which we give for free.
I was amazed. Okay, I'll take you up on that. But I was amazed how much I've retained, though, because I want to get back to it. But it is incredible how much you do retain.
And even if you remember, so to finish up my point there, is that if you get harmed, it's not just you who's being harmed. Yeah, it's your family. Right. It's your daughter, your son.
Again, it's an
they have to
ecological
live in
effect.
that background. You know what I mean? Your wife. You know what I mean? Like, this is huge. You know what I mean? And I always say, if you won't learn to protect yourself for yourself, why not do it for your family?
That's why this version of a wise selfishness is really the same as the care and the love of others, if done right,
well,
because of that ecological
and connecting with other people is the most being good. My view of life, helping out and being a good person and making friends is the most selfish thing you can do.
Absolutely.
I am an incredibly selfish person. I really like making friends because it's the way we're wired.
It's true. Very true.
And back to your thing, you're right. We teach in the class, in the course, we teach on a scale. So I basically, the way the course started was I had taken martial arts all my life. And I had karate, and I had black belts and all that type of thing by the time I was 20 and all that stuff. And I loved it, and I'm a great fan of, and I loved all the positive aspects. I grew up in Finglas. I grew up in a loving working class family. People didn't go to college; it wasn't in their mind to go to college. I ended up, training my ass off, doing karate, developing very positive systems, going to Trinity College because I did martial arts. So it's So I'm a very, very great believer in the physical experiences of that stuff. But what I found as I got older is that I really felt there was a lot of people who just wanted to know how to protect themselves.
Right.
And it was a little bit like we were saying, if you wanted to learn how to swim, there was no point unless you're going to be an Olympian.
Right.
And there wasn't people just doing enough. We're back to the swimming metaphor.
And it seems like that because with a lot of martial arts, and they're wonderful, they're great experiences, but it seemed that even after a number of years, you would have developed something excellently, but it wouldn't have been self-defense.
And
even when they're good.
Yeah, and you have developed lots of very positive life skills, but it's not self-defense. Because I've trained them, you wouldn't believe them at the black belts I've trained.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but the other side of that is so that's where we came. And what happened was I had an IT company and a consulting firm. And I sold out of it because I basically really decided I was tired of making money for banks.
Okay.
I really decided I just wasn't connected to this. I was pretty good at it. I was running I'd launched 3 or 4 banks. That's what I did for a living. And I basically got involved in a few things. And I decided I was going to take this project on, a kind of gap year. That's what it was. And I was 34, I'm 50 now, 34, 35 at the time. I says, I've been working in consulting for 16 or 17 years. What most people consider to be quite a successful consulting career. Had my own company, sold it, and I said, okay, I'm going to go after this. And I'd read, remember 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yeah. And I'd read, habit number 2, I think, is begin with the end in mind. And I'd said, what's going on? There's a lot of people want to know how to protect themselves, but there's no one really doing it. So I set myself the frame. And what I did was I said, what ifs? Do you remember that movie Minority Report?
Yes.
What if somebody came to me on Friday and they somehow knew that they were going to get attacked on Sunday night?
Okay. Nice point.
And there's nothing you could do. And it was going to be attacked by 2 guys down a laneway. Yeah. And there was nothing you could do. Anything you did, the timelines would collapse and you're always back in that laneway being attacked. But you had 2 days to be prepped. So that's why my course is actually called 24 Hours Self-Defense. Okay. And I had 24 hours to get you to a point where you could survive and escape. And that is the frame.
Well, there's some of that stoic pragmatism shining through.
And it's constraint. But I'm a great fan of constraints.
Yes.
Like one of my favorite questions as a therapist was when I used to be was, if you have 30 seconds to solve this problem, what are you going to do?
Fabulous. Terence Deacon, the cognitive scientist, has that nice example he uses in Incomplete Nature as one of his books. He talks about an engine has its strength and its power because there's constraint, because of the pistons. If you imagine there were unlimited degrees of freedom, there'd be no force. It's only by constraining it that you then get the action, and then you've got some power. And they
say in innovation that the most important thing you can do is put constraints on something. Right. And it's actually a great book. So we got off a topic,
I think this is right at
where we came from. And it's called A Beautiful Constraint. Okay. There's a great book called A Beautiful Constraint.
Check that out.
And go and look at that. And I always look for when I have another business, I work with business owners like yourself, and I always look for the constraints and say, there's the opportunity.
And life sometimes quite kindly gives us restraints, doesn't it?
But if you look, most people see constraints as the problem.
That's right.
And it's back to stoicism again here. Yes. The whole concept of the obstacle.
Yeah.
The obstacle is the way, Marcus, or really
Yeah.
is like the thing you avoid is the thing or the thing that you think is holding you back is your growth potential. Yeah.
So we seem to have a huge tendency, and it's an ability, I think, that leads to the problem, to be able to move between different worlds. We're able to be present in the moment we're in. We're also able to leave this moment and be off somewhere else thinking of something completely differently. And, again, as we were connecting with, in that moment of fighting or that moment of attack, sometimes that's the problem. There's a kind of a disparity between those two moments. The other person is off in another world thinking this couldn't possibly be happening. That's not the world I live in. Whereas the other person, of course, is very much in the world of what is happening. So that grounding or connecting those two things together seems to be critically important.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more on that about, the way you could be thinking everything's fine when it's not.
Yeah.
You could be thinking everything's terrible and imagining attack when it's not happening either. So either way, there's a disassociation from the moment. What is that? Not cynical, but critical, but attentive awareness to the present moment, do you think, in the middle?
Yeah, I think we've got to look for triggers. I think we've got to look for triggers. You know what I mean? And I think, I'm a great fan of, Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Right.
We only have so much cognitive ability at a time.
Yeah.
And we've got to, first of all, build habits, build safety habits. I'm glad, one of the things I try to do, you did, of course, I try to install safety habits. I have this rule about space.
Yeah.
And I actually know, I'm teaching this great, if I can get you to trust your instincts, to connect with your instincts, but that alone could save you. If I get you to understand this idea of having your hands up and managing space, that alone is just disrupting the script in so many ways. So I think we basically got to have rules. If you look at every system, if you look at pilots, if you look at everybody who operates under high stress situations, and they observe, they always trust their instincts, they train and hone their instincts, and they have triggers, and they always act on the triggers immediately. My wife is a medical scientist, and there's rules, and those rules are just not breakable.
Right.
So one of those rules is, for example, if there's a packet of blood, so that blood has a life cycle, has a lifetime, and that blood must be used by 11:59 tonight.
Yes.
And that blood is the same blood.
Yeah.
And if somebody needs that blood, the fridge will let you take that blood out until 11:58, 11:59, and at 12 midnight. You can't take the blood out.
So it's like the thinking is done in advance to allow more freedom in the moment.
So I think you can never solve that problem in the moment. You can only act in the moment.
I'm thinking of Captain Sully when he's landing in the Hudson, and when he's praised for it, he's saying, "Well, look, I'm literally following my checklist in that moment," and he's describing it, and he's doing it to the letter.
Yeah.
And of course, the training is to do that, isn't it? Is to follow the checklist in that moment. He's not ignoring the fact there's a problem, nor is he panicking and thinking of everything that could go wrong. He's systematically aware in that moment.
Yeah, but there's something really interesting in that as well, though, because the movie's out, and I'm a great fan of that story.
Yeah,
it's a great story. But they wanted him to go to different airfields. They were offering him, offering him alternatives, but he just knew at the rate. First of all, no one had ever drilled that specific problem ever.
Right.
That was the first. No one ever conceived that these engines, these things at that height, at that rate of climb, would ever go out. So no one had ever, they drill everything, of course.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
That had never been drilled. So he just knew in his body, remember, body, that he knew at the rate of height and rate that he was never going to make it. But the guys were disassociated, watching this on screens. They were running mathematics. He just knew he was in the plane. And I think that is just an amazing example of someone trusting their instincts. Like, you build your skill, and your instincts come from your as I said, your instincts emerge out of your application of habits and skills over years. But in that moment, he acted. And if he had tried to get, as was requested, and the other thing he didn't want to do was fly across the city, because he's trained.
He knew.
He's trained not to crash this thing.
Well, it's like when we drive or even when we walk, isn't it? There's not an awful lot of thinking happening if we're doing it well. It's feeling it. We know our clearances, acceleration, deacceleration, clearing spaces. It's felt, isn't it? If you're doing parkour, free running, there's no time to think, isn't it? There's this responsiveness.
It's linked to this stuff. Is it Eric Anderson and Baumeister? Right? So you got two guys. And you got Baumeister, who talks about willpower and habits. And you've got Anderson, I think it's Anderson, Erickson Anderson, who talks about deliberate practice.
Right.
And this whole his stuff is work was misquoted in the 10,000 hour.
Oh, the 10,000 hours. Yeah, sure.
That's kind of misquoted.
Yes.
I know, and you know, who was the guy who wrote that? But the New Yorker guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, it says, I wasn't saying the same thing. He was just using an example.
Right.
But Anderson has this idea of deliberate practice, and Baumeister has this idea of limited willpower. So we only have so much like willpower. You know, we wake up. His theory is we've got this reservoir, like your computer,
Gets
like your
depleted,
computer game. You've got an energy force.
Yeah.
And and our willpower is used by our inhibiting reactions. Like if you're in the car,
Sure.
and somebody cuts across you, and you go to shout at them, and you don't. You're using willpower. But when you try to learn something or do something hard, and I really love this stuff about when you look at somebody learning something or processing something, and you look at the neurology, and under a scanner, the neurology is just lit up like a city.
Yes.
Like one of those cities.
Yes.
But once they've practiced and built it into a habit, it goes down to part of the brain called the basal ganglia.
Yes.
And when you look at the light, now they're doing the task, and there's only a glimmer. So the energy load,
it becomes automaticity, reflexivity, exactly.
So to me, what we only have so much. This is it. You have a finite amount of energy to deploy somewhere.
Yeah.
So in our training, that's why I keep all our classes, our moves so simple.
Right.
They're all built off the instinctive reaction, and we really try to get you a set of habits and a set of insights that basically work with what the body does anyway, and then we give you cues and triggers.
I remember you speaking before about speed, strength, and stress. I think that's the model, wasn't it? In that, could you say a little about that?
Well, there's a few different ones that go. And one of my favorite ones is lead with speed and devour with power. Like get into the fight if you're being assaulted. So this is back to we drill. If you think about, we drill you if you're touched and you get a fight, you move.
Right.
You just anything.
Conditioned response.
It's anything.
Yeah.
Get in. And if you remember, there's lots of exercises with your eyes closed. So we have a whole, like I had a lot of training in experiential training, and there's a lot of things we get you to, for example, to move, have your eyes closed so you're walking off touch. Like sight is overrated in combat.
Yeah.
It's the first thing to give your eyes get blurred, your sweat and everything. So people trying to look, you feel.
Yeah. And on that sensory level, because that's what stood out to me, I think, in a few things you've said, is how non-tactile we can sometimes be. Yeah. I know IKEA had a new range out there a while ago where they had some designer come in for them, and they're talking about there's like burlaps and you can feel it and its texture. Yeah. And they're talking about a world where we're often looking at things on screens and we're not making physical, visceral contact with things. Yeah. Doing something like that, there seems to be an awful lot to it, that you're literally having experience with people. You're touching people. You're connecting with people. That doesn't always happen.
We're tactile people.
And on this note, this feels wrong just sitting down here. I feel like I want to get up with you. I think that's what's happening. You're moving, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I relate. So basically, and then of course, the other thing is, we have levels of intimacy, and touching another person is a big deal.
Yes.
And we know it.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And I think Morris, the guy, Naked Ape guy, Desmond Morris, he wrote a book on human intimacy.
Right.
And he basically pointed out that there's 12 stages to intimacy. Yeah. Which go through from eye to eye all the way through to genitals to genitals. Right. Like, and there's 12 steps, and you need to follow those steps.
That's a different 12 steps.
But the point is that if you skip those steps, it's a big deal.
Right.
So so a lot of the intimacy is like eye to eye, look to look, hand to hand.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Body to body, shoulder to touch the shoulder.
I don't know what Krav Maga would be. That'd be a whole different.
So it's instinctive, as we understand that you shouldn't just touch somebody. So that can work against us. You know, when we get confused when somebody breaks that.
That's right.
So what happens is somebody, for example, touching someone in the face is a big deal. You certainly wouldn't do it to somebody you didn't know. Yeah. And you know, in certain cultures, touching a child on the head is So this is my thing: is when someone touches you, and you don't know them. If you're not prepped for that, and you don't have a trigger for that, it's a big deal, and you go into confusion.
Right.
So you don't want to have a trigger. Yeah. So basically, and remember, to touch you, you have to get into your space.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's back to all this idea of understanding space. That brings you cognitively present.
And it is that idea of just stretching that range of sensory experience sometimes, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, whatever about even fighting or good technique,
Yeah.
it is just awareness of that.
Yeah.
If you were to just literally go into a room with people and as they have contact in different ways,
Yeah.
different forces, using different senses,
Yeah, and feel it. Yeah,
that builds so much more control.
Yeah, and your point is very valid because, you know, part of the training is being the bad guy as well.
Right.
You know, like we always think, remember...
Do people enjoy that
They
generally?
do, I
or-
think. And it's very interesting to, like one of the things we do, as you know, is we at one point in the drill, we get people to shout very loud.
Yeah.
And I teach a thing where we've shown you who basically, remember, pretty nasty now, okay? Yeah, pretty nasty, and where we get people to practice sticking their tongues into someone's eyes.
Yes.
Which is not something we do on the first date, but it's pretty serious.
Yeah.
But then I get people to shout at people. Like, I want you to shout and go away. And a lot of people don't want to shout.
Yeah.
A lot of people are secretly saying, can I just stick my fingers in their eyes?
Okay, can I play along?
Yeah, but I point out, if you won't shout at somebody, you aren't going to stick your fingers in their eyes. You know what I mean? There's a sequence of events.
Well, there's therapies built on that alone.
Yeah, the whole sequence.
Yeah.
He has a whole sequence.
Yeah.
Like in NLP land, they used to call it neural bridges.
Right.
Like, you know, just step by step. But the big thing here is that, you know, is all the way back to touching somebody, shouting at somebody. These are things that normal society doesn't want us to do.
Yes.
And that's for very good reasons.
Yeah.
And when those rules are fully observed by everybody, then it's great. But when someone breaks those rules, we need to be able to act.
And this must be a concern that you're asked, is it dangerous teaching people how to fight in that sense? And it wouldn't have been my initial concern. I would have thought the opposite in some ways. Maybe it's dangerous for people not to have an understanding of their ability.
Yeah.
But at the same point, you can see where somebody might ask the question. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the people who are going to attack you won't put that investment into their skills. They'll just get 2 or 3 mates.
Right.
Or they'll get a weapon.
Yeah.
They're not going to go off and build themselves up. Like muggers don't go to mugger school.
No.
You know what I mean? People don't go to special school to learn how to attack people.
Right.
They just do it. And what happened is they swim in the ocean. They just do it. They have the experience. They have the experience. They understand what it's like. They understand the confusion interrupts that happen with people. They understand that most people, if they do their best to try and pick people who they can frighten. They do their chance to shock people.
Yeah.
They basically rely on people's unwillingness to harm another person.
Right.
As a weapon.
That's why it works.
Yeah, and that's why it works. And that is why when, like, the statistics are phenomenal. And when someone goes to harm you, when you fight back in a vast amount of things, they don't go, okay, look, we've got a good one here and continue. They go, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
And if you were to go back to all the advice, you know, all these really horrific guys, you know, a lot of this research comes from the States, you know, these really nasty guys, Boston Strangler type guy and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And when they go in and look for them, and when they go in and basically ask them when you ask the bad guy for what advice would they give, and they say always fight, make as much noise, never believe lies and threats. This is one of my things. Never ever. The Boston Strangler used to go up and he was a really nasty piece of work, and he used to go up and he used to say to the person he held, do what I say and I'll let you go. And guess what happens to the people who believed him?
Right.
They died.
It's an interesting point because does that seem like a trustworthy person to begin with?
Yeah, exactly,
but yet we do go along with it. We have that compliance.
We want to believe.
Yeah.
We want to believe it.
Right.
So we have to. So one of my things is don't believe lies or threats.
Gotcha. And I think that's the problem, isn't it? Because that other world I was talking about that the person's in, where they're thinking, no reason, this couldn't be. My world is a safe world. This is how I see the world.
Yeah.
Out of a goodness, I see other people as being as ethical as I am in that way. This couldn't be happening. So in a sense, we're lulled hypnotically, aren't we, into believing what we're told.
And rapport and all that stuff.
Yeah, we want to believe
this
it.
forced rapport idea.
Yeah.
Like somebody does something for us, reciprocity.
Right.
That we actually feel, and we're hypnotized. You know,
absolutely.
And that's a really good point. And what I meant to say there is never believe promises or threats.
Right.
Promises, I won't hurt you. Why does someone need to promise you they won't hurt you?
Right.
It's because that's a weapon to enable them to hurt
it's
you.
Like the police forces without fear or favour as well, isn't it? It's like that. It's just this neutral point that we're aiming for between.
And the really big one is to never believe threats. Because the threats are to try and get you to do something.
Right.
That puts them in a better place. Like somebody says to you, get into the car or I'll do this, right?
Yeah.
So the threat has you are not where they need you to be.
Right.
So the purpose of the threat
Yeah.
It's to get you where they need you to be.
Right.
So you don't believe threats either.
Right.
And one of the most famous, like this one's been on Oprah, which is never allow yourself be taken to a secondary crime scene.
Okay.
Which is back to threats and promises. Right. No matter what. Never ever. If someone confronts you in a laneway and he says, say get into the car, it won't hurt you, or say get into the car, then basically just don't. Decide to. One of the things I die there.
Right.
Because they're not prepared to.
This is part of this kind of foot in the door principle as well, isn't it? That, of course, it's not that anybody might be okay with any bit of that, but they're more okay with something that seems smaller. It seems a little safer.
Yeah.
It seems like, at worst, dying now or getting into a car. Now, from those two options, that's fine. But, of course, we need to aggregate all the future possibilities as well to do a fair comparison.
And you take the statistics, which, it's one in my head, whether it can be checked, but there's something like the amount of people who go to secondary crime scenes who are never seen alive again. So the rule is, so it's back to rules.
Yes.
Simple. You ask me, how do you take such a complicated world and basically, first of all, space. So we don't care why, we care how.
Yeah.
We do things like we control our space.
Right.
We watch out we trust our body. We trust our instincts. Our instincts, we basically look for no tripwires. One of the things I like to do is, if you find yourself, I talk about the trust formula and what it takes to build trust. And trust is, in my opinion, is behavior over time. Okay, so it's consistent behavior over time. But so if you find yourself trusting somebody too quickly, it could be an indicator you're being manipulated.
Okay.
It could be an implication of forced rapport or active reciprocity.
Yeah.
All been acted on you, hypnotizing you. It just uses that to be compliant. So if you find yourself going, he's really nice, he's really this, or she is really nice, and you've only known them half an hour, a couple of hours, this could be maybe time to take a pause and plan.
Yeah. And that awareness just seems to be a big part of it.
Yeah.
Taking some of the principles we talked about there and thinking about the future of, I suppose, education, and, I mean that in a very broad sense, there seems to be a complaint which comes up in many different places. The classic place is Ken Robinson's TED Talk on Do Schools Kill Creativity? And, many other versions of that. But there seems to be a sense in which generally people like us and people who are listening to this, having these kinds of chats that we have, seem to be of a fairly common opinion that education isn't what it could be in terms of its breadth, I suppose. Bringing in the physicality, bringing in health, bringing in communication skills, interpersonal psychology, that these seem to be extremely important, grounded, basic things.
Yeah.
There's, I suppose, a romantic notion that we'll pick them up as we go along through life. That may have happened if you're in the right tribe at the right time.
Yeah.
It might not, though. What do you think about taking some of what you do in your learning and thinking, I don't know, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years ahead to an education system that in some way instills, not dogmatically, but gives people exposure to these ideas, it lets them learn practically. What might that look like?
Yeah, well, I think I love what you said there about education, and I think there's I really like the idea of environment as nutrition. As mental, as emotional nutrition. Nice. And the model that I've come across was this idea that we all have our innate needs.
Yes.
So our needs to be secure, our needs to be connected. And the needs, we all know Maslow. And Maslow is great and is a great framework, but it tends to be hierarchy. But it's not really hierarchy. I think people are born into web and
good
balanced.
Point. Yep.
And we think that once I'm here, I move on to the next one. We're always working on them all.
Yeah.
And I think the things about security that I think when Maslow coined it, we very much thought about like food and shelter as caveman type stuff. You know what I mean? Where security these days is about am I being bullied on Facebook?
Right.
Or am I going to? So I think we've got our needs, and we've got to understand that the needs are there, and then we've got what I really love is this idea of our resources, and that nature imbues us with a set of resources, capability, potentialities, and they are like an imagining brain,
right?
And a brain that can plan, imagine. They are the ability to build rapport. They are the ability to dream, like dreaming as a way of relaxing the body after the days. And then we have lots of so we got the ability to build rapport, the ability to dream, the ability to imagine, and the ability that what I really love is this idea of a metaphorical thinking and metaphorical brain. We can learn from analogy. We can learn from, I always talk about rugby. I'm a real rugby fan, so I would say, are we on the back foot, or if you're in your day, are we sprinting here, or are we rucking? You know what I mean? And we can apply those things. So I really love this idea of the purpose of education as a way to help you meet your needs but grow your resources. And then so in self-defense, I think, you know, in learning, it teaches you to stretch yourself.
Right.
It teaches you, it gives you self-efficacy. Self-efficacy breeds efficacy.
Yeah.
You know, when it engages a growth mindset. You know what I mean? A growth mindset teaches you that it's okay to fail, and that, you know, the biggest thing that people see is that, and ultimately we're going to fail. Like ultimately there's going to be a stop, and it's how you do it. And then building resources, you know, building your abilities. Right. And I think that's what education is about. Right. And I think it's the physicality. I think we are at it. We are, until we hit the synchronicity or whatever, when they do load the brain up into Diamante's idea, when they do load the brain up into computers, we are effectively a physical being, and our physiology, our physical well-being is incredibly important than our mental well-being.
And it's almost like there's some sort of a, I don't know, industrial revolution type split between people who think and people who do, isn't it? In some way,
this is
weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that seems so unfortunate. It seems, maybe it's just me, but I love the idea of finishing geography class and being covered in mud.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's something
and it is. Yeah, I totally. And as you see it, like I'm teaching a class tonight, and there'll be guys, you know, ranging from the age of 30 to 70, and they will be wrestling. Yeah, they will be the same guys who are back at the forum or whatever in the Greek amphitheaters. Yeah, and they were Socrates was chatting away before he went and had a wrestle. Yes. you know what I mean, or engaged in swordsmanship or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And this idea, and I really think back to what you said there. I really love the idea of the Stoics, which is the philosophy as a warrior, the warrior philosopher. Beautiful. As opposed to the librarian philosopher.
It's the well-roundedness you mentioned, isn't it?
Yeah, and the doing, like we are emergent. You know what I mean? You can write all the treatises on walking. Right. You can, you can try all the, but no kid is going to learn to walk from reading your treatise. He's going to learn to walk by falling a lot.
Very nice.
You know what I mean? And
so bringing that in, so of course lots of things are happening in that area, and I suppose what inevitably happens is things get incubated in their own form first, and then maybe they become more mainstream, hopefully with time. And you know, things like martial arts tend to be classes. It's not considered mainstream education. It's considered a good thing you do, but it's not considered core education. The same with, I suppose, music lessons has become more incorporated maybe into schools. I mean, PE, things like that exist as well. It seems like we like to get the physicality in. I know one thing that's happening, of course, is a lot of stuff with virtual reality and augmented reality, where they're saying, look, you know, using the example of the geography class, at least let's stick on the headset and actually look around the location. Yeah. You know, rather than just talk about it in that way. Is there room, do you think, for them to be bridged to some degree, the physicality and the...
I am a great fan at the moment of a website called an app called Freeletics. Don't you know Freeletics?
No, we can link to it.
Yeah, it's a fitness coach.
Okay.
And it's an app. Yeah. And it gives you workouts. Yeah. And what's going on is that basically, so on my app, I want to do a workout. I have my virtual coach. Yes. Has given me a workout. Now, he took my age, took my current fitness profile. He gave me a fitness test.
That must be scary. Did you get a number?
Yeah, I type it all in. You know, you could do press ups. You hit the timer. You're told to do things. Stop the timer, and it's all based on this kind of amalgamation of everybody else's results. Yeah. And he gives me a workout. Mm-hmm. And then I do the workout, and he times me doing the workout. Okay, nice. And I tell him how out of 10, effectively how hard I found. Could I do more? Okay. And this workout keeps being more, and I love it because he keeps changing my workouts. Brilliant. So, and I've got, and there's communities, online communities. There's a Dublin Freeletics Facebook group where people then set goals. They have leaderboard, and to me, it's this real idea of it's enabling me exercise. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not virtual, but it will be, I'm sure, or augmented reality. Yeah. But basically, I have a coach on my app. Yes. And it's not just a guy giving me generic, here's 10 exercises to. He's taking in my feedback. He's tracking me against other people. You know, and they do all this. This machine learning.
Sure. So it's kind of the hope, isn't it, that it will go full circle from a kind of almost an arrogance post-industrial revolution, setting aside of good, honest physical movement, that we kind of move into kind of intellectual space. But hopefully we develop great technology, and then it helps us move all the way back again into physicality.
It frees us up. I think that, and to be honest, that's what's happening with me with Freeletics.
Let them support each other.
In the past, I'd say, you can kind of, of course you can get a workout off the internet. You can do the 7-minute workout or something like that. Yeah. But this, I get points,
nice,
like it's they've gamified it.
Yeah.
So I get points, you know what I mean? And I get points against other people.
Yeah. Because we even see that with like virtual reality technology or with consoles where, okay, it's a headset, but at least you're moving your head around now. Then they're adding on conveyor belts that you walk on. There's movement, there's motion sensors, so you can see you're getting back into it again. What used to be very passive and was watching TV, now has become an immersive thing again.
Yeah, and exercise, and I think there's a huge potential. But I think, I think it's a very interesting potential. I think, I think we've got. It's a long way to go, and I think it's going to be a lot of divergency. But I think ultimately, when I look at it, and it's a weird experiment when you basically have spent, as a person who's kind of done a little bit of research on how the brain works and all that type of stuff, and then you go and you basically go in and you train people. Very physical, brutal, visceral concept. And then what's more important is the people you meet.
Right.
Like I have, yesterday, the weekend, there was a French doctor in my class with his son. Yeah. You know what I mean? There was, I have everybody, and I always had this thing. I have, I jokingly, the amount of emergency ER doctors have done my course is really interesting.
Oh dear.
It's a bit of a weird one. Are you sending them to you? It's a bit of a loop.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a loop. Yeah. But they're learning self-defense. You know what I mean? And they're learning to harm it.
Sure.
And I remember this guy who was a neurologist, and I was teaching a move against really bad, and this neurologist just shaking his head, and he's kind of going, have you any idea how much damage we're going to do here?
From his lens, I'm sure.
But he's doing the move, so you kind of have that weird loop, the snake eating itself. So I think, I think we've got I think inherently when you come back to people, people are people. Yeah. And remember, we've had technology bursts all our. My favorite one is from I remember a book I read years ago was that people don't often understand the actual technical breakthrough that the transcontinental Morse code was. If you just think what actually happened. That one. It used to be news came every 6 weeks or 3 to 4, we say, from the States to UK or to Ireland. True. So, and then one day you could tell somebody how much corn was being sold at in New York Exchange versus the London Exchange.
Massive implications.
And now people could start engaging in arbitrage, and then people start working late. Because now I used to be that I was in the city in London, and I'd work my 9 to 5, and I go to my coffee shop somewhere. But now I hang on because I know I'm going to get the corn, the prices of corn from the US as it closes at 9 o'clock my time. Yeah, so we've had technology changes all the time. And
what about in therapy? Because a big part of my work is really advocating this principle that therapy isn't a couple of people sitting in a room, a Victorian-like room, talking about something. That can be therapy, of course. That's fine. That's important. But so much more potential is there if you think about how advertising works as a form of behavioral change. It's much more distributed. It's social. It's there's a lot of things going on. I'd like to think that many things can be therapeutic. Certainly, what you do is therapy. I think for so many people. It's important, and therapeutic experiences, back to your point about kind of an emotional nourishment, essentially, we can have these regularly in a more distributed way. How might therapy change? It's not just sitting down. Can it be more moving? Can it be more experiential?
Yeah, I think so. I love that idea. I think fundamentally for therapy to go to its next level, though, I think its business model has to change.
I think so, yeah.
I think you want great therapists, but unfortunately with the way therapy is going these ways, people are curing people quicker and quicker. So you need to...
Which if you have a long waiting list shouldn't be a problem, but I know what you mean.
You remember the Freud, like you see your books, the Freud, he needs a good 20 years of analysis.
That's right.
I think that's an interesting... So I think therapy needs to be more... I think that we need to blur the lines between people being broken have been damaged,
Very
and people
nice
living
point.
fuller lives.
Very nice
fuller
point.
lives.
Yeah.
I think we like, and you know, I think we've had this idea that happiness is not the absence of mental mental.
Fabulous point. Yeah.
Yeah, and this idea that, you know, I think we all need some level of coaching, support, and the world doesn't give us that anymore. Like we used to have mentors.
Yes.
We used to have, you know, the old guy in the village that we looked up to.
Exactly.
We used to have, I remember working as a barman, but way back in my days, the old barman.
Yeah,
he showed me
yeah.
how to pull a pint of Guinness, and I
Yeah.
was on the guy. And so I think the therapy needs to move. I think therapy is, if you understand what does therapy mean, you know, as a word.
Yeah.
And I think people see it as a negative. Something has to be wrong with you. Like you know, the best thing you can do is go and get you know, your body is your body. Back to physicality. The best thing you do is get a sports massage before you need it.
Right.
Before the fascia.
That's right.
Before the fascia builds up, before the thing. So I think I'm a really big fan of like I sneak so much philosophy and stoicism and growth mindset stuff into my classes.
Brilliant.
And I think without
All for
people
the better.
realizing that they love it, they like the classes as much because of that.
Well, that's it. You're hitting both levels.
Yeah.
You're getting the physical, you're getting the cognitive
And you
at the
got to
same
give
time.
people, you know, belief in themselves. And I think there's so much, and I think we're keeping a lot of the stuff we know secret.
Right.
Too much.
Right.
Like, I think we've just rambled off. I don't have any different ideas.
You're right there, though, about therapy, because it's such an old and sort of a strange model to begin with. And it's not that it doesn't work, but it's that, you know, we can do better, I think. And again, to constrain it in such a limited way seems unnecessary. Now, it becomes a bit more complicated, obviously, when you try and facilitate people and having a range of experience. Again, it starts blurring the line between entertainment and social interaction and experience. But I think we could maybe think of therapy as a kind of an intentional approach to those things, isn't
or
it?
is it
Ensuring we have a
education?
balanced diet.
Or is it education?
And it can be that. And as you said, preventative.
Yeah.
And hugely important is the point you're making there about it not being about something broken.
Yeah.
I mean, this notion of things being broken isn't a very naturalistic way of looking at things anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever your view, if you believe in God, you think there's a plan. If you believe in an evolutionary description, evolution doesn't have right or wrong. It just has developmental, it has fitness, it has adaptation. There's no real one argument out there that things being broken make sense with it.
And also we time fix it. Like, you know, we're emotional beings. You know what I mean? And I think one of the biggest things we've done, you know, this whole thing of emotional avoidance.
Yeah.
I think we need to learn to process and help people process emotions.
Well, that's a big part of it.
Process.
It is.
We're going through something and I equate this to myself. We're going through a bereavement in our family at the moment, and just processing sadness.
Absolutely.
And it's there.
Yes.
And I know myself, and I had this conversation with my wife recently, is that we do emotional avoidance.
Absolutely.
And I think, as the world is, in some ways, the world comes to a start with Facebook and all that. We have to be happy.
Absolutely.
Like, you know, like no one's ever sad on Facebook.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like, and then this whole idea of, you know, FOMO. People ever think I'm a loser because I'm on my own tonight. And everybody else doing selfies. And so I think this idea of understanding and learning how to process emotions.
That's right.
And that we're inheriting. And I used to be. I would have been an emotional avoider. I would not deal with sadness.
Yeah.
And I would not deal with even pessimism. People being pessimistic. And then I think I did some training myself, and I just learned, you know, process it. Because the more you push against it, the harder it kind of it solidifies. You know?
And that's it, because you do learn so much, don't you, yourself within your, again, this kind of wise selfishness kind of a point through facilitating and helping others.
Yeah.
It's so empowering. The amount you learn, isn't it, from the people you work with
and I think,
as a practitioner.
And I said, exactly, And as I said, when my wife would say, we're just dealing with this thing, let's just process this. And with, like, the bereavement, we were looking at photographs. I'm being sad.
Nice.
You know what I mean? And then you put it aside. You know what I mean? And I was helping, just on the other side of this, I was helping somebody recently, and who was stuck in processing bereavement. And one of the things we did was have a time for bereavement.
That's right.
You know, I'm sure this is a classic. It's a classic. It's like, you know, okay, just park it. Right. You're going to be sad, but we're going to, like, on Sundays, you know, we would say on Sundays between 10 and 1.
Absolutely. Give it some space.
That time. Yeah.
It's sort of an air traffic control of feelings and thoughts, isn't it?
And don't deny it.
That's right.
But just allocated.
And there seems to be, in that processing, there seems to be a space between obsession on one hand and repression on the other.
Yeah,
isn't it? Where you can just process, progress.
Yeah, and you want to just let it go.
Let it in its own way.
Yeah.
Exactly, naturally.
So I think, so back to education, all I think fundamentally we are visceral, physical human beings.
Yeah.
Like, I remember Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
That was a very interesting character over the years. I've done some of his stuff.
And
he basically has this idea of your body as a spacesuit for your consciousness.
Right.
Like, you know, and if you're on the moon,
that's one way of putting it.
Yeah. It certainly took me a while to understand it.
Yeah.
But if you go back and say, you know, if you like, and that's what it is. It's the thing that holds your and basically, if your spacesuit isn't being looked after, you know what I mean? If you start getting leaks in your spacesuit, your consciousness.
But like, I think this point about nothing being broken, again, if we use the software analogy, software being broke, it's not necessarily the point. You don't necessarily upgrade from Windows 95 to something newer because Windows 95 was broken. Yeah. That's not the point, isn't it? It's ongoing development for its own sake.
And sometimes the computers just need to turn them on and off again.
That's right. We do need a bit of a reset, exactly. a bit of a
reboot, you know?
A bit of a grounding.
And I think, because I think this is a very interesting, because we say broken, we fix it in time, don't we? Whereas reality is everybody's sad one day, everybody's down, and I think when you start to understand things like understand your body, understand glucose levels, understand willpower, understand all these different things, and understand we are, you know, our bodies works on a rhythm, and it oscillates.
Yes.
Everything oscillates.
Yeah.
You better hope it's oscillating.
Balance comes in.
Oscillates, and to understand that we don't have to be happy. Again, back to my Stoics.
Brilliant.
No one ever promises happy, and what is happiness?
Yeah.
And happiness versus pleasure.
Yeah.
And gratification. You know what I mean? So I think, people teaching people that there is no right answer. That I think that we are in a world where we don't have to, anti-Maslow world almost, where we don't have to work as hard just to be existing.
Fabulous.
You know, if you go to, I spent 2 years in Malawi.
Right.
And Malawi at the point in time, this was the poorest country in the world. I think Haiti is taking that honor these days, but for a lot of AIDS and all that. But I'm going to tell you something very interesting. The rate of depression was very low.
Right.
People were too busy.
It's true. I've spent some time over in India as well, in the villages. And again, I mean, it's anecdotally, I don't know what the stats are, but it's just amazing the quality of interaction, isn't it, with the people?
Yeah.
The smiles, the playfulness, the warmth.
And who have done some, the World Health Organization have done some analysis on this. And the other side of it is, if you're feeling down in Malawi, in a village in Malawi, does the tribes around you? Yeah. The family, your greater extended family is around you. You know, children are brought up by their grandparents, like you know,
village
like
to raise a child.
It takes a village. But also, you know, you're given space. You've got a community. You've got people to help you. Where we think, what is the single biggest in this connected world? What is the single biggest issue? Loneliness.
So true.
And I think people need to be taught how to make friends again. And how to connect at a more. And again, this is the guy who teaches people how to fight. You just ask me. I think I see it, but I see the connection and the friends that get formed out of sport, out of connection, out of how doing challenge together. And the thing I love most of this world is when we do our training tonight. I know we're going to go into a 90-minute class, and I've got some advanced, and people are going to push each other. They're going to encourage each other, and at the end of it, all these guys are going to high five and hug themselves.
Yes,
hug each other. You know,
and that's a lovely example of that moving in and out of modes.
Yeah.
When I work with clients therapeutically, invariably they describe what's happening in their life and the difficulties and their goals, and towards the end or towards the middle of a process, invariably I find myself thinking there'd be something wrong with you if you didn't have these difficulties that you have, because it is the response to life experience and how we process it in that way. That's a very exciting note, I think, to think that there's that room to process things differently, to progress in that way.
And like this observing self, and to observe. You talk about feelings about feelings.
Yes.
But I love to observe yourself. You know what I mean? Like, it is a gift that most of us don't often observe.
Yeah, but it's there.
Our ability to reflect on our own behavior in the moment is an incredible.
That intentionality.
And I think bringing all the way back to self-defense, like, it's the ability to realize you're being triggered. We're human beings, we're triggered. And we can be triggered into violence. We can be triggered into aggression. And to be able to, in the moment, observe that and control it. And I think it's, like as you said, I think you said something very, like farming, like you're talking about you have to expose yourself to these experiences to be able to control them. Right. Like, again, they don't show firemen videos about fires.
That's right.
You got to get singed.
That's why, colloquially, since Christopher Nolan came on the scene now and directed the Batman films, I've been calling that the Batman principle, because it's quick and easy to get across. So if you think about Batman, why is he called Batman? Because he's a phobia of bats. If you remember, he fell down the well when he was young. And Christopher Nolan is a good background in psychology. I think he draws on all the useful principles and makes them a little more interesting than some of the earlier Batman films. Exactly.
I like that because I was a fan of Batman. I'm very aware, and the whole confronting your fears.
That's right.
And reminding yourself.
He goes to train with Liam Neeson's character Ra's al Ghul. What did he do? What's your worst fear? You train around the bats. You name yourself as the thing you're most afraid of, and that's the principle, isn't it?
And it's back to the obstacle is the way. And there's a great thing. There's a guy who has a book called The Tools. I don't know,
yes. Stutz and Michaels, isn't it?
It's a very interesting book. It's lovely, and they talk about everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Right.
And I've used that, like, so the very fact that you're feeling this fear is
learning to work with that,
and that's linked to the growth mindset and the fact that there's a Stephen Pressfield, I don't know if you ever come across him, and he wrote a great book called The War of Art, and he talks about the resistance. Whenever you try to do something, there's this resistance, and the resistance wants to hold you back, and it's the friction in your life. So
not just getting better at being happy, but getting better at being afraid.
And saying, this is information.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it is weird because, that example I used earlier, how, I'm not advocating this as a goal, but, for the masochist out there who enjoys the fear, and I don't even mean a 50 Shades of Grey kind of way here. I'm talking about, I'll work, let's say, with two people in the same day. One person comes in and says, John, I've got a phobia, fear, and anxiety of X, whatever that might be. And we'll do work on that. Then somebody else will come in and they're a different kind of masochist. They're an adrenaline junkie. And they'll say, John, the fear has gone away. Can you help bring it back? So, if that doesn't show so clearly the different relationships we can have to the same kinds of emotions, nothing does.
And it's back to oscillating. Like, what's the famous thing? That the number one thing we want in life is security, and then the next thing we want was change.
Right. I often thought, that Channel 4 show where they get the really overweight person and a really underweight person, put them in the same house. It'd be great to do that with anxiety, the adrenaline junkie and the scared person, and do that and see what happens. It could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, but I think it's back to, as you just said there, the whole idea is we oscillate. It like through the day, through the moment, or up and down. Where our mood is very, very, very driven by the situation. Mm-hmm. Like, what I mean, like that. I'm a great fan of your environment as nutrition.
Yes. Yeah, and that nourishment.
And I've like, for example, I like looking around here. I see the same thing. And I have a home, I have a library. And often the things like so that environment's very important. When I'm trying to solve a problem, I'll actually not even open a book. I'll just look at the books, and I'll just read.
Beautiful.
And I'll just read the titles on the books, and I have a thing was, what would I have a couple of autobiographies, and like, what would George Patton do here?
Yes. Exactly. I mean? The amount of wisdom we can access. Because I do that with clients as well. Just say, well, step into the shoes of whoever, this expert on this topic, and immediately they rattle off all this great advice, and it's like, well, that person isn't there, you came up with that. It's amazing, isn't it, the wisdom that we have.
And then I think understanding your strengths as well, and then understanding, because there's some great stuff in this about flow and all that stuff, but the other side of flow is that we've also, and people are saying harness your strengths, but there's a lot of these strengths that we have a capacity for that we don't access,
we don't develop,
and we don't, and they're there, they're almost there, but we have like our habitual methods.
That's right.
And then if you can somehow through your environment cause you to access some of those things, it just gives you new options.
Well, they say fish would be the last to know what water is, and I think the problem is we're so immersed in our own experiences now that we don't see a lot of it. I like to think of technology as a nice example of that, because it's easier to look outside sometimes than in. If you think about what we have in modern technology, iPhones and iPads and computers and Wi-Fi, etc., I mean, all of that existed in the Stone Age. There's no new stuff in the world. Just the wisdom to recognize it, isn't it? And use it. And then think forward 100, 1,000 years from now, what's actually sitting here in front of us right now that we're not seeing? Isn't it?
And I wonder about that. Like, and I sometimes wonder, have we had with a bit of work, have we had the golden age? Have we had that?
There's no signs things are getting worse, are there?
Yeah. But no, I'm just wondering, like, you know, we've had that moment, you know what I mean, of where technology and thing, like, and I'm just wondering.
I wonder, is it a bit like the pendulum effect, where we kind of keep having it and we maybe integrate a bit more over
time? But if you look at the world now as well, we're talking about fear.
Yeah.
I mean, fear is a weapon.
Yeah.
And we see othering going on. We see more regression, more nationalism kicking in. And that's in many ways, a result of obviously things that happen, but it's a result of political process.
Sure.
It's people are choosing to, and we have this other thing that we have to be very careful about our environment, because whatever we hear a lot of, we tend to believe.
True.
This idea of the mere exposure effect.
Right.
That when that we've seen people just tell lies, and then we hear those lies repeatedly.
Well, the difficulty is it creates imagery. It creates an experiential quality. A good storyteller, so you have to process it even to not believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a bit of a problem.
And if you
there.
just process that over, and it comes through marketing, if you process that over and over and over and over, and like the research is there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think one guy that he was basically just. He was a lecturer, and people would just come into his lecture every day for months.
Yeah.
And there'd be just names just written on the. And which we never referenced.
Yeah.
Names he had written on the blackboard and just around. And then a month later, on a study, he just asked people to rate names they liked best.
Okay.
And the names that they liked best were the names that were on the blackboard. And they
so often with advertising, that's what happens, isn't it? It's not that we love the ad, watch it and like it. It's just pure familiarity. We'd rather go with the devil we know than the one we don't.
So I think back to education, we need to teach people how to filter. Mm-hmm. We need to teach people how to question.
Yeah.
And
how to think, not what to think, isn't it, that distinction?
Yeah, and to just know, to understand manipulation techniques. So back to the self-defense, I teach people how I would mug someone. I would go and I would have polar bears. I would go, and if I was going to mug somebody, I'd stand. So where's another watering hole? I was watching TV there recently on BBC, and it was about get this right. It was I think it was a crocodile. Crocodiles and alligators. So it's a crocodile, and he only eats once a year. He's in the Serengeti, and when the big wildebeest are doing their crossbreed, he only eats once a year, and he's in the watering hole, and he just waits and one day someone comes in. If I was going to mug somebody, I'd probably stand by an ATM. I would basically look at them. I'd stay off angle so I can get a sense of how much they took out, because I can only book so many people at a time. And then I'd make sure that I had an ATM that was near a place that was 50-50, that was a bit isolated, and there's a 50-50 chance that someone would go down the isolated area. You know what I mean?
Very good.
So,
well, like the example of having the fire extinguishers and having a fire safety drill, there's nothing negative or morbid about that.
Yeah.
It's a stretching of those directions, understanding something, which hopefully you don't have to use,
and
but
then
you can if you
you still have to train to use a fire extinguisher.
Exactly. Exactly. And you have to warm up every so often, practice it, and maintain it.
And I think knowing how these things work and knowing is an important part of the process.
That knowledge leads to more autonomy, hopefully better decisions.
Yeah.
And this is a huge question, but from your life of interesting experiences and explorations, is there any theme or any kind of key learning that stands out for you, that something that you feel is something that maybe you wouldn't have been as aware of kind of at the start of your journey, or maybe you've become much more aware of, that you think, you know what, this stands out as really key learning that you give as advice to people?
Yeah. One of my big bits of advice is, as I said, survival rate for life is zero.
Okay.
And I think it's and this comes, and it's to value experiences.
Okay.
I mean, more than possessions.
Yeah.
And and experience requires another person.
Yeah.
To really we are designed to be connected.
Right.
We are such great. So my and as I said, I told you earlier on, and you were all looking to feel important. I think I understand we're all human beings with the same needs and same resources. If you can try and understand other people as just doing their best, like no matter what their manifested behavior is, right, to meet their needs, you can then become more. You can communicate better. So one of my things is basically, I believe in a frugal lifestyle. I believe because that makes you free.
Yeah.
Because, oftentimes people confuse income and income with wealth.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? In
Yeah,
this
big
world,
difference.
and identity, and they don't realize that's in many cases it's a borrowed identity.
Yes, true,
you
true.
You go and work in some place.
Yeah.
You go and work, and I've been there, but you go and work
Yeah.
in some place, and you're getting $100,000 a year, and then they decide to pull out. And then you're not getting it. So are you living your own identity or are you living a borrowed identity?
Right.
So my big thing is basically survival rate from life is zero. It's all about the experiences. Like we're personally, I'm and I'm not saying always they're all. And I say experience. I'm not saying luxury experience.
Yeah.
Like my next, we're just planning a trip at the moment. Next month, myself, my wife, and a friend, are doing the Trans-Siberian Expressway.
Oh wow! Always wanted to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm not. Yeah, and I'm kind of going, and I'm kind of like, so I forced myself into that experience. But I'm kind of going, God, like a nice hotel in Lanzarote. Could be
Well,
nice.
that's true.
Could be
You've seen
nice
any
too.
Carl
It could
Pilkington's
be
journeys?
nice.
I'm thinking it could be interesting.
Yeah, but I've kind of pre-committed myself.
Yeah,
I know
but that's an experience.
Yeah, and that's what I'm after.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're literally going, and there's things we're going to experience that we would never experience in life.
Right.
We're going to, part of our train is going to be a 48-hour non-stop train trip.
Wow.
When is the last time? You know what I mean? That I've never been on it. Like we've flown to Australia, 2 12-hour flights.
You're no Darren on a bad day.
Yeah, trying to get to Mayo.
Yeah,
Had to get to Galway in 15 years ago. But so I think you've got to manufacture and create experiences.
Right.
And I think all the research. And again, I'm a total analyst on basically, and that basically all the research shows the best money you ever have is the money you invest in experiences, and it's usually invest that experience with other people.
Right.
And what I try to do in my 2-day course is I think we learn through experience. Mm-hmm. And in our weekend course, somebody posted a really really nice message. One of my guys who trained with me before, we have a Facebook group, and he basically he retook our course this weekend, and he went and he posted. It was just fantastic. I was quite touched to see that myself and the other guys were my assistant instructors had retained our enthusiasm.
Right. That's a beautiful point.
And that was quite touching, because
Very
when
nice.
I go in, I see. We have our own pre-frames and things we do. When I go in, people say to me, "You're not bored teaching that class." No, it's different people, different challenges. And myself and my team have we kind of developed habits, we develop triggers or something. And basically we view is today we could teach someone something that would save their life.
Absolutely.
That is, do you think a heart surgeon gets bored of doing heart surgery?
Yes. Yeah,
you
very
know what
nice
I mean?
point.
I'm certainly not putting myself in that place, but you know what I mean.
No, completely.
So we go, and that was very touching. So I think it's experiences, and I think it's the connection you have with people, and that's what I would basically, my single biggest advice as having been, I first spent the first half year of my life, half of my business career, being what we consider to being a very very well paid, very successful management consultant.
Yeah.
Like I did the ridiculous daily rates in boardrooms in Manhattan.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I honestly say I felt empty.
Okay.
And I woke up one day and I realized I had all those trappings. And that basically I realized that I had to get out. You know what I mean? And that basically is don't borrow your identity and create experiences.
Well, that doesn't sound like anything you'll regret looking back on the decisions you've made.
Yeah.
It's been great having you on the podcast.
Thanks very much,
If people want to find out a bit more about what you do, what's the best place to go to?
There's 2 places, patrickcumiskey.com.
Okay.
That's just a place, and then Krav Maga Ireland, like with lots of different things. Like yourself, I am a portfolio existence person. Krav Maga is my vocation, but we work on lots of different things.
Yeah.
And I'm actually all about, like yourself, human performance.
Right.
At business level, individual level, and from a self-defense perspective, it's KravMagaIreland.com.
We'll put the links up as well, so people can get through.
And we've lots of videos and we've some free self-defense guides and all that.
Wonderful.
If people ever want to ask you for them, we're happy to share about them. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick,
Thanks very much.
and thanks for being on.
Thank you.